Hello, and welcome to the Vassals of Kingsgrave review discussion over George R.R. Martin's new book, Fire and Blood. Here in the lecture hall of the Citadel, we will be discussing this very interesting history of the Targaryen royal family from Aegon I all the way to the regency of Aegon III. I am Paul, SerDinnerRoll on the forums, and joining me today are Michal.
Hi, I'm inkasrain on the forums, and also I appreciate that you made it sound like this is a long period of time when it's like a third of the Targaryen race.
For all the pages I had to read, it might as well have been a long time.
Well, I was talking to Katie, and she was like, "Okay, so how much does it get through?" And I'm like, "She's like, so does it get through like Darren? Like, are the Blackfires in here?" I'm like, "Oh, honey, no, we're not even. The Unworthy is not even here. We're not there yet."
And Kevin is also joining us.
Hey, I'm Kevin, creepy nuncle Kevin on the forums.
It always sounds a lot worse when you say it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It does. Well, so there's one
regretting
Kevin.
that one?
There's one Kevin in the books, and they call him Nuncle Kevin all the time. Jamie and Cersei do. So
That's fair.
thought it was funny when I made it, but yeah, it's not fun to say out loud.
Matt,
Hey, Blue Armor on the forums.
Sara,
Hey, DrBlood on the forums.
and David.
David HHH on the forums. Hi, everyone.
All right, so Fire and Blood. Let's just start off with giving our first impressions. I think I'll go last, so instead I'm just going to throw Michal under the bus and ask for her opinion right away.
Great, thanks. I think that parts of this book are excellent. Peak George writing, honestly. Obviously, the Jaehaerys and Alysanne sections are a highlight. I think that other parts of it are maybe would read better if we hadn't read them already, or mostly already. And there's a certain amount of, I feel like George is usually pretty good at identifying characters who are shitholes and, just not real, you can admire them in certain ways, but not real, it doesn't seem like he really falls in for that, but it's for some reason, Daemon Targaryen seems to be his boy, and, it's weird to me, and, that just increasing, both, Daemon's terribleness and his, George's love for him seem to, expand in the Dance of the Dragon section, and I wasn't so into that, but there were a lot of really cool women that we got to meet, Rhaenyra Targaryen, super lesbian, awesome lady. And yeah, the art also, by the way, the art is amazing. It's really evocative, and just there's something about it that really captures the time for me that, you know how in Game of Thrones they went for a kind of Middle Eastern, Mediterranean look for King's Landing, and this is just no. No, it's London. Just
One of the biggest kind of regrets I have with only getting the audiobook is not having access to those illustrations, because I've seen a few, particularly the one of Arya Targaryen in the Maesters, and I'm just fuck, why didn't I get the damn book? So I'm definitely now looking into adding that to my collection. Kevin, what did you think?
I liked it a lot. A lot of fun new Targaryens. I read the book on my phone and then listened to the audiobook, which so I didn't on the audiobook listen when they did the introductions, and I thought for most of it that it was Charles Dance that plays Tywin, and it's actually a guy named Simon Vance. So it was fun to pretend like Tywin was reading it to me for a while.
I have to say I really enjoyed Simon Vance's read. I thought he managed to make it very nuanced, and I kind of feel like I like Gildane, and that's, I think, to his credit.
Yeah.
And I replayed over about 10 times when he introduced Keg and Ale and sang that song. He sang the cheer that they did, hail, hail, Keg and Ale. It just made me so hard.
That was very good. Yeah, I had really enjoyed his work, specifically with the voice acting. Matt, what did you think?
Yeah, I'm along those similar veins. I had I try not to go in with any expectations, and so therefore I was pleasantly surprised by many aspects of the book. Obviously, Jaehaerys is my favorite, and the Regency was also excellent as well, as being kind of the major two new pieces of information that we got. Although it was kind of disappointing as the book just kind of stopped. We go through all the Regency, and they're like, all right, and now Aegon III has been crowned, and then blank, and then fade to black. And so it's kind of disappointing that we didn't get to go on and see more stuff about Aegon the Unworthy and all that nonsense. I hadn't read. I had stopped reading the short stories. I just felt it unnecessary to pay $30, for these anthologies to read a $50 or 50-page short story. So I hadn't read Sons of the Dragon. So it was still new to me, but also, I didn't, I don't know. It wasn't that entertaining. They're both shitty kings. The only thing that really excited me was seeing another of the 7-on-7 trial by combat. And that was, you had stuff like that. And then the stuff with Arya is kind of, these few glimpses into more spectacular scenes we would see out of a normal fantasy novel than just a recorded history. So those were always entertaining. And going through the dance again, it'd been a while since I read it, so it was kind of fine. The only thing about the dance is that everyone involved in it is bad. There's very few good people to really root for on either side of that conflict. And so it kind of just gets dragging and depressing after a while. But seeing the overall context of it all and how it all unfolded was definitely fascinating. The part that kind of disappointed me the most was the first section involving Aegon, mainly because he's the Conqueror is still such an enigma, and I really just want to know more about him and really how that relationship worked between him and his sisters. It just seems such a fascinating dynamic that no one really touches on, and no one really knows, much about him, who he is, what his motivations were. And it's just something I wish I knew more of. If anyone's ever read the Malazan novels, he's very reminiscent of Anomander Rake in those novels. And so I wish we could get something more about him, because I feel like there was a lot going on in his head that would be interesting and impactful to the story that we're reading in real time now. But overall, pleasantly surprised, really enjoyed the book. And, I would look forward to reading another one after the series is over.
Right. But please after.
Yeah, please after.
Which George has said may not happen now. That's the weird part. So he may actually do it between the two books.
Right, yeah. I mean, if he needs to do it to help take a break after he finishes. I mean, not. No. So I would say not after he finish Winds and then at least get started on Dream, and then if he needs to take a break in the middle of that, do it. But other than that, I would hold back.
Right, but that might be an 800 page break, which.
Right, yeah, which would be
not good.
All right. The learned Sara, whose notes might actually be guiding us a lot through this podcast. What did you think of the book overall?
That is a lot of pressure, for sure. But I'm gonna vocalize what will probably be a very unpopular opinion and say that I would actually rather have the second one of these before Winds. And I will tell you why, because I'm sure the Facebook or YouTube rage is just
very brave of you to say, I must say.
I know, but I'll tell you why.
I don't agree, but good for you.
No, I'll tell you why. And I think it's because once Winds and Spring are out, that's it. That's what happens, right? We have all the answers that we're going to get. We know, full stop, the completion of the story. And I think that much more so than the World book, I think that this works on the level of a novel in terms of enjoyment and reading it. I thought it read beautifully. I thought it was very engaging. I thought that the characters were exceptionally well developed, even the much smaller ones that we only sort of get glimpses of. And so that part of it was enjoying from a literary standpoint, or enjoyable from a literary standpoint. But I also think that there's so much in here in terms of, quote unquote, factual information that rewards the level of engagement that we're willing to give to these books, right? So
that's fair.
He gave us a gift in this, I think, and I don't think it was just to keep us busy until Winds came out. I think that truly this was written with an appreciation of the depth and the level of thought that people put into this world. Like, I think I took it as a response to that, and a very respectful response to that, so that there is enough in here to keep us busy and to keep us thinking and to keep us challenged in ways that the novels will foreclose rather than promoting. So that's why.
The late Lord Varley has joined us.
Hi.
Hi.
Varley is never late. He arrives exactly when he means to.
Yeah.
We'll get to him after David. What did you think overall of the book?
So I feel like in many ways this was very, very representative of George. Like, it's like that little girl with the little curl in her forehead. When it's good, it's very good, and when it's bad, it's horrid. George takes all of his writing style things and intensifies it here. Like, when he tells us a great story about this great character, we love it, right? I mean, there's so many good little stories in here that you can just get excited about. But then when he gets slogged down on crap we don't care about, it's just like, okay, enough already. Like, one thing that killed me in reading this is at times I just loved it, and then at times I'd be sitting there reading going, because like we'd get the list of the 17 different knights that joined in this battle that we'll never hear from again. So did we really need to know the names of 17 of them? And then in my mind as I'm reading, I slow down because I feel like this is important, but it's not, because we're never going to hear from these people again. Or each and every one of the maidens that helped this queen. It's like, okay, can we just get to the point already? But then when he gets to the point, I like it and I love it and it's fun, So it's like when George, just like in, I think one of the big criticisms of the last two of the real books was when you get to the point and get to the stuff that we want to, we love it. But some of the world building is great. Some of it we love, but some of it's just excessive and unnecessary. And I think having a maester write it just intensifies that in some way, because it's supposed to be dry. I mean, that's what a maester does. And so, I just go from love this to love this to, and that was my feeling generally upon almost every chapter of this. There were parts that I was just like, woo, hands in the air, love this moment. Oh my God, did he just do that? To, oh, can we just get on with it already? Which to many people was like the experience of the last two books, I guess. So to me, this is George in a nutshell. And we're still here. We all talk about this. We all join this podcast for that. So I guess on some level, that's great. I'm glad I read it. I have been reading all of the novellas and short stories as they've come out because it's new content in this world, and I'll read it and I'll enjoy it. And now we'll pick it apart because that's what we do.
All right. Varley, you set up?
Yeah, it was all right.
A fair assumption. I'll give mine then. I'd really enjoyed it, specifically as a guy who loves just reading history books, and this one just reeks of scholarly historic text.
That's what it is.
Yeah, specifically, I just I'm also the guy who's like, oh, I love the Silmarillion, even though it reads like a King James Bible. It's just incredibly dry, and and I love that, and I love this because it's sort of like that, but much more academic than the whole Silmarillion. So specifically, like I loved not just like the characters written about in here, but the character who is writing about them. Like when World of Ice and Fire came out, I was just like, oh yeah, it's a cool history book. But then I'm like, wait a minute, this is written by a maester, and he's writing it for Tommen, so he's obviously going to be biased towards the Baratheons and Lannisters. So that's why, like, I think, what we might bring up later, why Maegor gets painted in such a harsh light. But then we have a Targaryen supporter, Gyldayn, who is apparently the last maester to serve at Summerhall before it was burned down. We have his...
Who's alive.
Yeah, who's
Are
alive?
you a Maegor apologist?
I'm not
No,
gonna
I
say.
am.
I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying
we're going
we're
there.
gonna get
We're heading
there.
Maegor fake news.
We're heading there.
But I specifically just loved it for the reasons David said he hated some of it, because I'm like, yes, this night, and I make a little note beside it. I'm like, I shall have to do some research on this fellow if I
Except
can.
that there's thousands of them. There's nothing else to research sometimes.
I know.
That's the problem.
The thing with me, like the reason I mostly enjoyed that was because they were always like there was something personal and alive about most of those mentions.
managed
You know,
to
I
give them-
didn't feel like it was, you know, totally bland and drab, which is why I think sometimes George actually is quite innovative and in my opinion kind of groundbreaking in this format, because he does manage to make some of the history really of this fictional history come alive in a context that we think of as like real history, you know.
Yeah.
There were times when I was like Googling something and I'm like, wait a second, no, that's not real.
Right.
Yeah, like someone.
Not regular Wikipedia, Michal.
Yeah, you need the other wiki.
Yeah.
Someone I
Yeah,
had
I was-
talked to mentioned how they kind of felt he was sort of like a literary Coen brothers, where a lot of his minor characters are a lot more like popping and more interesting than some of his more main characters that he follows in this book. Specifically, what I loved, but it also infuriated me, was every time Gyldayn would reach this one character and give a little background on them, and then go, and something
Not
happened
more
with them,
specific.
and they continued on and went on several adventures, some of which have been repeatedly written about. However, because they no longer deal with the Targaryen family, we shall leave them here. And I just scream at my book, no!
Right.
Yeah, I
we
love
need
when
those
he builds
voices.
references into it, where he's like, you know, for more on this, see the text, blah blah blah. And I was like, yes, I would love to do that.
I'm like,
please.
yes, tell me more about
Check
this
it out from the
erotic
library.
novel in the universe, because I need it now. Thank you
Not a
very
thing.
much.
Yeah.
But, I mean, yeah, I search Amazon for the Jade Compendium. I mean,
Right.
it's like every
Yeah.
few days. I'm like, it's gonna be on there.
I'm pretty sure that's a dildo name.
Yeah. I mean, but that's kind of the point I was getting to. Like, if there is more on these people, that's totally cool. Like, I love that. If you want to refer to someone who was in one of the Dunkin' Eggs or whatever, that's great. But if you're just going to give a name and, like, some stupid fact about them, that's nice. But, like, it reminded me of in the main books when we get a character who we find out what they're wearing, what their hair color is, what their eye is, what their sigils are, and all that, and then they die on the next page. It's like, well, okay.
But
That's
it's part of the
true. I mean, I
artist,
think-
isn't it? Like, it's
Yeah,
part
I
of
think it
the...
depends on like how much you value the world building. And I think that people lean too hard on, oh, it's world building to defend Feast Dance. But I do think that there is a certain validity to it. And I think that when he writes those quote unquote throwaway characters, like those very incidental characters, I think that he does so with the same energy and the same almost like reverence on some level for, first of all, for the larger characters, but then also for what an historian would do when you come across a name that is otherwise unattested. We're like, oh, I wonder
Right.
who that person was, right? But there's an energy to the fact that person existed in this world that I think is captured really admirably.
Well, this is like just trying to narrow the scope of your thesis, right? I mean, you're focused on the Targaryen family. Lots of interesting characters come in and out of that story. But if you go too wide, like, and then if you're pissed about this book world building. That's the whole purpose of this
Right.
book. Compared to like Feast Ants, I get it. Like the argument that it's world building, it's annoying because there's a certain narrative that we're following of all these POV characters that we need to see a conclusion to. This entire book is world building and expanding upon all that like little stuff that we learned from the main series and from Duncan Egg and shit.
But also, like, I think it's worth saying, at least in my opinion, this book is at least one order of magnitude better than the World book, because, it's not world building for world building's sake. Yeah, there's a lot of story stuff here. There's a lot of the world stuff feels like it's going to either it's relevant, like, actually, like there's magic going on, or the twisted dragon babies, or some stuff that's happening. But then there's also like just the enrichment of the history and like, why are people from this city like this, and that is relevant in this exact
right.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, like the burned man.
Yeah.
So imagine like how epic the world book would have been if George wanted to do that with that artist and that artwork that accompanied it. It would have been epic.
Yeah.
But it's the difference between an encyclopedia and an actual work of historical scholarship. And I mean, it's a very different genre from a novel. Yeah. And I think if you pick this up expecting it to be a novel that expands, that you are going to be disappointed. But if you pick this up thinking in a kind of suspended disbelief of this as an actual book that an historian of Westeros would have written, this is an excellently written historical work.
It's a lot of fun for that, to that point.
Yeah.
Like I think I really don't think this is dry for a history book at all. Like I know I was reading it, and there was a book I read recently made me think of about the three cousins before World War I, George V and Wilhelm and Tsar Nicholas. And it's just like that book I was reading, it was like a gossip column, but still history. And I was kind of thinking, I was like, man, this is so much. As I was reading Fire and Blood, I was like, this is so much like that, where it's like, you get the history, but then you also get Mushroom talking about who's sleeping with whom and who's doing what, and it's
agreed.
It's like, so saying it, I don't think for a history book, it's far from dry.
Anyway.
But is it like historic fiction? Is it like I know, there's stories about them like getting together and stuff like that, but like when you're writing a historic thesis, like, or even if you're reporting history, you're not going to admit that like George's whole like authorship is like that unreliable narrator. Okay, but you can't actually have the narrator quote an unreliable source multiple times, calling it unreliable, but still reporting it as if maybe there is some truth. Like that's what I don't get about this book.
Well, I mean, in a certain sense too, it's written, not that we're on the same timeline as them, but histories from medieval and Renaissance times in our world were before the idea of historiography or really being very good at separating fact from fiction. So
winners write the history.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's not perfectly accurate, I don't know. I had a lot of fun with it. So
I mean, I took this as somewhere between, like Sarah Vowell writes really accessible, sort of like mainstream, very solid historical scholarship. And like a drunk history episode. Like I felt like it sort of went in between, where it's like real details and real information, but it's, presented in this way that is also very engaging and very enjoyable. And I was gratified to see that the hype for Gildane that you get in the World book, I was like, man, I really hope we find more of these pages because these are so much fun to read. Like, I really feel like this paid off here where we did get his manuscript and it was really good. And I can see why the Maesters would have been excited about it, kind of like.
I don't want anyone to think that I'm like against world building because I enjoy it. My only point is if the world building is interesting and leads to a story that entertains me, which is great, and most of the book does, to be fair. I mean, I enjoyed it. I wouldn't have read it if it didn't, right? But it's the need that he has to fill in tiny little details that don't go anywhere. Like if it leads.
David, are you a Star Wars fan?
As in, I like it, but I don't rever it like many people do.
Right. Okay. Because actually, this did feel on a much better level, but it did feel a little bit like Star Wars syndrome to me, which is like, oh, we mentioned this one tiny character where there's somebody in the background. Let's give them a novel. You know,
But see, the
and
thing
now they have a
is,
comic book series about them.
the thing with me is I'd love to read that novel and that story about them. That's my point. My point is when I only get a list of characters that we'll never hear from again, it bores the crap out of me. And
But that's how history works.
I get that.
That's
I get
the
that,
distinction.
But ultimately this is still we're questioning, does this entertain us, right? Like, I mean, we can argue whether it's accurate or whatever, but ultimately it's a piece of fiction that's meant to entertain us. And the only point I'm making is that when he tells a story, I love it. When he just lists stuff, I don't. You know what I'm getting at? Like, if he has, sometimes it's only a story that's a paragraph, and that paragraph was like my favorite paragraph in the chapter. Like, if you tell me a story that I really enjoy, that's totally fine, even if it's a sentence. But sometimes it's just also known as the laughing guy. You know, like, well, okay, but why?
Yeah, but
like,
I mean,
tell me why. Like, give me a little of why, and I'll be totally cool with that. But if you're going to bring in this useless piece of trivia that you never explained to me, then what's the point of it?
It's a genre issue. It's not an authorship. It's a genre issue. So if you're approaching it, like I said, from a novel genre, like if you're picking this up as a novel, that is going to irritate the crap out of you. But if you pick it up as, again, like suspended disbelief, like I understand Westeros is not real and I'm not like delusional or anything like, but if you pick it up as a work of academic historical scholarship, this is a very well written of that.
But isn't it also George's
but it's
style,
not.
though? Like, George does this. Like, I do not believe for a quarter of a second, nor I think that he would care if I believed it, that when he wrote about the burned men, when he mentioned them offhand in Game of Thrones in 1992 or whatever, he was like, and they come from Nettles, who was the paramour of Damon, blah, 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 like, that is absolutely not true.
Was she, though?
He mentioned... Well,
we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Okay.
There we
the
go.
fact is, like, he mentioned that because he thought of it and it sounded cool. And I feel like a lot of this book is mentioning stuff that he thought sounded cool when he was doing his gardening project.
Absolutely.
Right.
And that's what I said. Remember, I said that I feel like this is very, very George. You know, in for all the good and bad ways, things we love and maybe don't always love about George. This is what he does.
I agree with Sarah that this is just how history books are written. Like, you could write about the 20th century America, and for every JFK, FDR, there's a Calvin Coolidge that was a president in the 20th century of the United States, but really was ineffectual. Like, there's a Harding, there's a Hoover, like, and then you have like,
but there isn't his like.
Okay, Matt, we get it. You know the president.
Yeah, for real.
People that served in this office during this time, and whether they're effectual or not, or whether they deserve more of a story or not, like, it doesn't make them any less of that person that was holding the office.
Right.
I also think that it's interesting because there's also like I think part of what we're talking about, kind of the ragged edges of history, like when you're writing a history, not that I've ever done this, but I'm assuming that, like, you can't tell the whole history of the world or the continent or whatever. You know, there are parts of their like editing the story is kind of a product of historiography that has to happen. And it felt very interesting to me when Gildane was like, and stuff here was going on in Bravos or whatever. And, like, I'm not particularly interested in what was going on in Bravos, but it was clear that he was like, this is sort of connected, but not enough, and I can't put it in here. And I find it, I find it fascinating.
That's the kind of thing you put on your grant proposal as, like, your next project.
Yeah, definitely reads like an academic source, specifically because history is a web. Everyone in history is somehow connected to varying degrees to someone else. So if you're telling someone's story and then you mention someone else, you might need to mention someone else connected to that someone else, but you need to keep on track. So I feel like George does a lot of this in this book, where he's like, the cause and effect is happening over here. However, we're more interested on the effect it has in Westeros. So yeah, you have this pirate king on the Stepstones, and I'll tell you a little about him. But then we can't stay too long because we need to concentrate on Corlys Velaryon, who isn't even a Targaryen. So no, it wasn't Corlys. It's Alan, whatever.
Alan,
and then
Corlys was very much a Valyrian and Targaryen.
Yeah. So it's very much an academic thought there, and I'm gonna need to cut us. We're going to need to stop soon so we can actually start going into stuff. But
Right.
just make your final points.
Clearly, we have
How dare you host this
100
podcast?
We have the seeds for 100 more books in here, and that's great. The problem is we're never going to get any of them.
Right, but
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
again, that's just what he does. Like,
Yeah.
No, absolutely,
Also-
which is what I said.
I don't think the lists are all that excessive. I think we get 5 or 6 names sometimes. We don't get this isn't the Silmarillion or something where we're getting pages and pages of names that you're like,
Everyone
oh my
lay out
god.
the fucking Silmarillion already. Jesus.
I like the Silmarillion, but that's
the Silmarillion is boring. Anyone who hasn't read it knows that.
Yeah,
You leave Tolkien alone!
How dare you?
he's not your bitch.
We are officially in a fight.
I think
Tolkien is
that
not your bitch.
what we're sort of failing to appreciate or maybe appreciating without realizing it is that what George has done in creating this book is exactly the same kind of just epic level point of view writing and sort of character, just a character occupying kind of writing that he does that makes people so surprised that he can write women, right? They're like, how do you write like that without a vagina? And it's like, well, how do you write like this if you're not a historical scholar? But he's occupying this character and writing in that character's voice in a way that is absolutely breathtaking as far as how much it resembles something that a maester would write.
Fair point.
All right. So, yeah, overall, I think mixed reviews, however, generally good for the book. And we're just going to chug along through, do a little drops in on parts that have already been covered, and then focus primarily on the newer stuff we got, specifically concerning the reign of Jaehaerys and the regency of Aegon III. And so, starting off, I guess we can just go with anything really regarding Aegon I or his sisters, specifically. And I'll start with one. I really enjoyed hearing about some of the Targaryens before Aegon. The ones who were just kind of bumming around on Dragonstone going, well, what do we do now? But also, I was just really enthralled by this throwaway Targaryen kind of, Gaemon the Glorious, who did some really kick-ass things during the Century of Blood, apparently, to garner the name the Glorious. And I'm just like, oh, well, certainly this is a Targaryen book. They'll obviously mention something about that. Nope. They don't give his exploits. It's just Gaemon the Glorious.
We get
So
Gaemon pale hair. That's
Do you think that it's
not
like a
glorious,
good name, or is it like Garland the Gracious or whatever in the books, where instead of being Garland the Gross, he stole a march on someone's nickname for him?
Maybe. I mean,
Or he is just awful?
That's Garth. Don't you put that on
yeah,
Garland.
it's Garth the Gross.
Garth.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, I was about to say,
Garland
do
is
not
a
insult
sweet
Garland
angel of his
Tyrell.
time. Yeah.
No, Garland has a different nickname because, right?
No, it's Garth. It's Garth the Growth.
No, I
is
know,
the
but
one
isn't
you're
Garland,
referencing.
his nickname, he was
Yeah, I
supposed
think
to
they
be
were
the
gonna-
Gallant instead of the Gassy or something because Garth the Gross took the Gross? I don't know.
No, it's I believe it's Garland who was responsible for heading off that and giving people nice nicknames over so that they didn't have bad ones.
You see, I
Which is
didn't
all
make
part
it
of
up.
George's ploy of making us think that the Tyrells are good people when they're not.
Hey,
No, they're assholes.
But yeah,
I will say, I very much appreciate the idea that the Targaryen, I like pre-conquest Targaryens, that they're just kind of like, well, here we are on our island, not dead, but the rest of everyone we ever knew, and it's that kind of almost Grey Gardens sense of we're this extremely grand, we have freaking dragons, family, but then it's also and that's really all that's going on.
Yeah, there's a really pervasive sense of well, that happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so they bring 5 dragons over. How did they do that? It doesn't really
Flew
mention
them.
that. Well, I'm saying, so there were 5 Targaryens that flew dragons then? It doesn't really
I'm
expound.
sorry.
You know what I mean?
That's just made me
Sorry?
laugh. How did they get them over? They flew them.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
don't-
did these other lines die off? You know what I mean? The cadet
Well,
branches and all that?
Yeah, it could have just been the fact that you had, not every Targaryen, not every Valyrian, I think, was a dragon rider, but, there were a lot of them still. So I think, House Targaryen had its few dragon riders, enough to fly the dragons over while everyone else kind of just puddled around on ships till they got there. I mean, it could have also been they could have gotten help from the Valerians and Celtigars, who were essentially minor Valyrian houses. Yeah, I
but
feel...
don't the dragons also? I mean, isn't it like having horses in a train? Like, don't they?
Yeah, exactly.
Follow with the
Yeah.
I mean, y'all feel like in the very beginning, like the
not a
Targaryens were just like the rednecks that won the lottery.
Oh,
totally.
They were
Very much
definitely
so.
the
Totally.
they were definitely the Beverly Hillbillies. They were
Right? They're
Aaron
just like,
is
I don't know what to
Jed.
do.
Turns out, like, nobody else in Valyria intermarried. They're just
They're just the weird ones.
like the Deliverance version.
They're all
died,
dead, so they're
get
just
to
like,
make
hey,
the
we're
story
kings.
up.
Yeah. But
I love that idea that the Targaryens, as we know them as like these amazing kings, were like these like minor noble. I mean, I personally I have a theory that the Targaryen line started from like the Valyrians, they started basically from like breeding slaves with dragons. That's my personal theory.
how did that?
And they were
How does
like,
that
like
work?
some slaves like particular, like blonde and purple-eyed or whatever, and that's how we get the Targaryens, who eventually come to think that they're the greatest people in the world.
And we're into tinfoil.
Good
Yes.
We'll save the tinfoil for the end here.
We just
It's
sent Sarah's mind a whirling.
I love tinfoil.
It really did,
I love
yeah.
tinfoil. That wasn't
I
a
mean-
negative comment.
I mean, they have babies that are half dragons, so I don't think it's too
Mhm.
crazy to think maybe somewhere some.
Well,
Oh no,
We'll
there's
get to
actually
that.
absolutely breeding with the dragons, but it's
Got
the
it.
question of whether that's just a Targ thing or whether that's a general Valyrian thing.
I have spent enough
you
time
think
thinking about
Arya-
this that I'm close to being able to breed my own dragons. Like I have this like very, but I'll save it for tinfoil time.
Don't want
Right,
pictures on your Instagram, though.
All right. Yeah, like I definitely feel like for like the next several generations after the destruction of Valyria, it's literally just the Targaryens going, well, what now? What are we going to do? All right?
Right.
I say we go east. Well, fuck you. I want to go west. All right, we'll just stay here for a little while and figure this out. And like maybe like for
For a century.
Danny the Dreamer, it's literally just, okay, let's just digest what just happened for the next few generations and just see what we get out of this.
Yeah, which is why I'm so fascinated with Aegon the Conqueror and his motivations, and that we get very little of. Because with the whole commissioning of Painted Table, the conquering of Westeros was very much planned for a while, and it was something that he'd been mulling over for at least several years beforehand. And the closest we get to hearing about his motivation is a throwaway line from an interview with George.
Right. That's right. It's not in the book. It's in an interview.
Yeah.
But I think an interesting part of the book that they say was like Aegon's landing at King's Landing was not the first Targaryen. Like other Targaryens before him were hosted in other cities, which like, I mean, I guess it came as a surprise to me just because we haven't read it before. But like, I thought it was just like him brooding, him like carving the table and being like, this is going to be mine. Meanwhile, like generations of his forefathers from Dragonstone were hosted at like Casterly Rock and all the,
Yeah.
by all the High Lords.
Well, it makes sense.
Right, yeah.
Like they're so close to this heavily populated like area to the west and to the east, so they're going to be integrated somehow. And I also think like Dragonstone has shit farming. I don't know much about Driftmark, but it doesn't sound particularly fertile. Neither does Claw Island, so I always assume that they would like fly over to like I don't know, but I get this like idea of Balerion just flying to the Reach, getting some supplies in his claws, and just kind of flying back to Dragonstone. Like I got the two large plastic grocery bags in each claw, and he's just
you'd have,
landing
like, a
down.
giant crocheted, like reusable.
Oh yeah, you got to recycle.
Yeah, because definitely, like, caring about the planet, that's the first thing for Targaryens. Like, care about
History
others.
of Westeros is doing like they're doing like a long series of reviews of the book, and one of the things I forget the actual origin, but one of their theories was that Aegon might have been influenced by prophecy, by like an end times prophecy of
Right.
others and stuff, and that might have been like, oh,
Yeah.
well,
Well,
By the way, it's
George
been a little while since I read the
George
book,
says
so if that's actually in the book, then
Oh.
I
No.
mea culpa. But
George said it in an interview. That's what we were.
oh, that's
earlier.
what he said. Yeah.
That was the point. Is that George said this, but he didn't actually put it in the book, which is the weird thing.
Yeah.
Maybe he
so-
read the same one that Rhaegar did, and they've just been like stepping on their own balls for generations after this one line in one book. Like,
Well, yeah. I mean, it's all been passed down through it.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and obviously Bloodraven was heavily involved in whatever research went on with that, and he's likely where Rhaegar got the info from.
Also,
So this might
go
might
ahead.
be like might lead into a bigger topic, but when I was reading about Aegon, I couldn't help but get Ned Stark vibes. Like they talk about him not enjoying the lists and not enjoying violence, but he's known as this really great warrior. And I don't know, it just sort of and then George's line about prophecy kind of gave me the idea that maybe he was more just like a man of duty than he was.
Kevin, I got more of a Stannis vibe from him. Because he
Okay.
felt like more like he was better than all the rulers of the Seven Kingdoms, and that's why they should all bow down to him. Like he seemed entitled more. But I get what you're saying. Like you get like that just coldness. Like I have to do this, or I need to do this, or it's my right.
Yeah.
Or
Rhaenys.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
it's
Aegon
just
listened
like
to
a-
the women in his life. Sorry.
Right. Yeah.
And
I love
No.
that. No hate.
Oh.
his sisters that he was married to and bore children from. Yeah.
Debatable. Well, he did
Debatable
that
with
Rhaenys. Yeah.
And with Visenya.
Actually, yeah,
With
debatable
both,
for both of them, I guess.
Oh dear.
Oh gosh. Hit the
Right. Yeah.
Oh golly.
But I guess I like. I know. I had this. We had this discussion like earlier on like threads and stuff. But I in general like Michael's conclusion where he's just like it'd be disappointing if the entirety of the Targaryen line was just a bastard offshoot.
True.
Yeah.
People also think it would be
Narratively speaking.
disappointing if Tyrion wasn't Tywin's son, and that is absolutely what the reality is.
There we go.
Yeah. Fair point.
Yeah. Also, is this like the first time we get actual confirmation that Balerion was actually born in Valyria, or did we get that before?
Mm.
Because
Unknown.
before, I'd always...
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's the
We got that
oldest
in World of Ice and Fire.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
I must have skipped that over, because I always imagined, like, all the Targaryen's dragons were, like, born on Dragonstone from, like, the dragons they had originally brought and had died out. But then, like, hearing, like, Balerion was from it, it just kind of added, like, another sort of, like, regalness to him. Like, oh, he truly is the king of dragons. Like,
Well, they live hundreds of years, so it makes
Well,
Yeah.
some of them
Yeah.
survive. You know.
We also didn't get his death in World of Ice and Fire. It just kind of got mentioned in passing.
it's just like, he got old.
So
He got
yeah.
cranky, he had to use a
So,
walker.
yeah. But that's where really George hammered down that he was alive in Valyria in this book, was when he died, not so much when they flew over.
You think
Yeah, that
dragon leukemia is like little doggy leukemia, and they just kind of
Oh.
slowly like
Thanks, Matt.
until they
What?
die.
God,
What,
well-
Varley?
Oh.
How would you?
Now we're all-
How do
we're
you
all
put down a
cholesterol.
dragon?
My
Like
dog just heard you,
anesthesia.
bro. Like I swear. You just gave me the saddest look.
The head tilt with the droopy eyes.
Now
Yeah,
I'm picturing
yeah,
a massive
you know.
dragon giving puppy eyes to like the
Right.
Targaryens. Like, anything else on Aegon and his sisters?
I mean, so the one thing we did get was more info on Visenya, just because she lived longer.
Right.
But maybe it's best to talk about her along with Maegor and others.
True.
We definitely got a little more of his actual time as king, as opposed to just talking. Like the World Book focuses more on the conquest. We got a little more of his time,
Definitely.
his time ruling, which was interesting.
Because
Some parts of it, particularly
learning-
his dealings with Dorne. But
Yeah, learning specifically what kind of came off as disappointing for me was when I had learned about like, oh, Jaehaerys and Alysanne made a progress to Winterfell. It always made it sound like they were the first Targaryens to actually go to Winterfell and stay there. And then finding out Aegon was just like, yeah, I'm going to Winterfell and I'm going everywhere. I'm like,
he went
well,
everywhere.
what makes so special about the trip with Alysanne and Jaehaerys? But then
Because
because
Alysanne,
Wasn't that the
Alysanne is
last
a
time
cutie,
they
and
loved
she's
her.
she's
They
a
loved
precious
her,
girl.
that's why.
That was the last time a king visited too. I think that's the reason it mentions it in Game of Thrones.
Didn't Aenys? No, Aenys didn't do shit. Never mind.
Well, I mean, also you figure
That was
like
poorly phrased.
The Starks are just like such an old line that they might see like the first Aegon Targaryen as like, give him like 30 years till he dies, and someone else will start ruling over those southern people.
And I imagine they didn't have like as warm of a reception for the guy who's like,
because they're in the north. I get it. That's hilarious.
Let's go.
For them, yeah.
Yeah.
Did you guys have any thoughts on what was in the letter? Like that just struck me as
I
a
always feel like it's just like, hey, Rhaenys is still with the Ullers, so you can stop this and we'll just give her a quick end, or you keep going and we keep twisting these corks into her feet.
Yeah, we're never getting that answer, I think.
See, I think
I doubt it.
Was, we jacked some dragon's eggs, and that's why it flipped the fuck out. That chick stole them to buy her boat over in Bravos.
Right. We'll get there.
All right.
Wow, those are the two likely possibilities.
Yeah, because like some of the ones he gives him was like, if it's a plea from like one, like father to another, I'm just like, then why is he getting so fucking pissed?
Yeah, Aegon would not give a shit about that. He's too cold and above it all.
Right.
He's got more important things to worry about.
All right.
Sounds like Stannis.
Oh.
Yep.
Yeah, but no. But I feel like comparing him to Stannis is a little bit of an insult, but whatever.
Right.
Born of salt and smoke.
To Aegon.
All right. So let's talk about the Sons of the Dragon. Anything interesting, new that was brought to light about Aenys and Maegor?
Well, let's also remember we never actually talked about the novella in our podcast.
True.
All new for the podcast's sake.
True.
That felt like outline to me. Like it felt like an outline for this.
Yeah.
For this section, like it was underdeveloped, and I don't know. I was happy to get more the way that we did in here.
So
I kind of feel like George is trying to do a lot of mythology groundwork laying with Maegor, but I also feel like he's not 100% sure what that is exactly,
Yeah, it's some like bastardization of magic and like will to power, and there's something weird going on where it's like everyone that exhibits magic is basically at the same level of like Melisandre right now, but it's like because we know the book series, she stands out as this like just inherently kind of like mystical, magical, like that's a source of real magic right now in those books.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to come and go as like mistresses, like here and there. Like every fucking king had like a Melisandre. Like, why is this a big thing all of a sudden? Like in this series of books, I don't get it.
Well, we also have to recognize that it may very well be that the maesters and the small folk and the other men, anytime a woman takes power or anytime she shows any strength, they try to attack her as a magic-wielding, evil sorceress. And that's how women were treated in that time. So it may very well be that in some cases, like Melisandre, they clearly have some power. But, anytime any woman does anything, they're like, oh, she was an evil sorceress. Like, that was how they attacked her. So the question
in the Sworn Sword, we see that, don't we?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like looking back on it, we have to try to figure out, well, was she really? And we know that there's magic in this world, or we think there is, or is this just the way they're attacking her?
I guess that's fair, like really fair. I didn't think of it in that point because like every king seemed to have like a mistress or like a certain amount of women in like his orbit that were like his advisors and lovers, but it always seemed like they'd pick out, and this probably makes your point correct, it'd always be like someone from like one of the foreign cities or something, like she was like the sorceress whore that like had the king's ear or whatever, not like all the noble ladies in the court that were also talking to him just as much.
Right. Yeah. It's like a weird mix of sexism and racism throwing in together to create this. But then again, we know that right, and we know there is magic in this world, though, so we don't know if it's real or if it's just their reaction.
Well, two points. From a historical perspective, like Anne Boleyn was accused of witchcraft. that was one of the charges on she was executed.
Yeah, but they were kind of like, what can we throw at her?
Oh, yeah, well, she had 6 fingers.
She turned me into a newt.
And she kept talking after she died, right? Like, according to that.
Doesn't that happen though? Like, isn't it, okay, I mean, I don't.
I mean, it takes a little while for the brain to actually shut down, but
Yeah.
not
You're
too,
not talking.
not
You're
too.
You're not
does.
talking.
No,
Yeah.
whatever happens.
Wonder
to
if it
you
doesn't,
after
guys.
so-
And after you die, you're just fucking stuck in your body until you rot away.
They've
You
done
really wanna break
studies
down
to
the podcast
suggest
like
that that's actually true. Like that you have a moment where you're aware that you're dead.
Well, thank
Right
God.
after
Now
you
death
die.
is even scarier.
Yeah, I
Right,
know.
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I'm not
Thanks,
sleeping.
It's
Sorry.
still better than going to work on Monday, man.
What I would definitely say I really enjoyed was specifically learning about the children of Aenys and his wife specifically. She's a Valerian. I'm really skimping on names.
Alyssa?
Alyssa, yeah.
Sorry.
Right.
Um,
All the names are so similar in this
yeah,
era too.
a lot of
So-
A names, but specifically hearing about kind of like the battle between, like the three-way battle between Maegor, Aegon the Uncrowned, and the Faith that's kind of going on. It all just kind of, as I'm like listening to this on like an 8-hour drive home during the holidays, I'm just listening and I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And then I kind of get going and I'm like, oh, okay, now I understand. It's just a big clusterfuck, like the War of the Five Kings.
But don't you think that like that's a cheap cop out to like the triumvirate of like Rome, where it's like a military leader,
True.
a religious political leader, and then like a kind of populist of the people leader?
Mm-hmm.
Kinda. I mean, it feels like the Faith is kind of the most populist in this reading, because we hear like a lot of its leaders are small folk leaders, like all like those people who rise up against him, like Septon Moon, and like
Right.
all those kind of bandit leaders. Like some of them. Okay, one thing I'll say is that I'm really disappointed that they made Septon Moon out to be just kind of like just a asshole, just a mean person. Because I was picturing like, what if like the small folk actually had this very like charismatic.
Oh God, he suddenly
people.
looks like Bernie Sanders in my mind.
Oh no! The Targaryens,
Right?
they're sleeping together too much.
That's not
This needs to
that's
stop.
not a comment
Wow.
on Bernie
Wait,
Sanders.
We can undo this. That one knight that rode with him was named Rupert Falwell, so that was super pious. So clearly Bernie Sanders would not be friends with the Falwell. So
That's fair.
But
I mean,
it's interesting because in this era, I mean, what power could the small folk have? I mean, religion, it kind of makes sense is where they would go because that's all they've got. You know,
Yeah.
that's the only power they could possibly wield.
I
it's
think
also really the only unifying thing prior to the Targaryens. I mean, that's really the only thing that unifies most of the continent is the religion.
I saw the closest parallels to, and I mean this betrays my own sort of issues, but I saw the closest parallels to Henry VIII and the church, right, in England, and that conflict where like maybe it was because they were challenging his power and that was a problem, or like maybe there, he actually had justifiable beef with them, but like that became the sort of all-consuming where either you were faithful or you supported the king, but you there was a point at which like you couldn't really do both,
Do you guys reckon that's why the Starks were able to stay in power so long in the North? Because there's no one person controlling the religion and not controlling the political power?
Oh,
Good
maybe.
point. I like that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Yeah, you're
True.
right.
Excellent. Scored one for
all,
Varley.
right. But it was
Touche.
the combination of them also commanding the respect of the people. I mean, so that's the main problem is because you had these two opposing forces, a new monarch that saw themselves as exceptional and wanted to be respected, as well as the faith who had been defending and protecting the small folk for generations before this time.
They were protecting the faith. They're not ever protecting the small folk.
Yeah.
Like maybe a couple people are, but
Fair enough.
The houses of power are protecting themselves, not.
Right, yeah, but it was their only chance at some sort of. They were the only ones they could look to in to get some sort of justice over, wrongful things when
It's kind of like a volunteer fire department is better than,
Yeah, I mean it was no matter how small, it was the only check like on lordship, on powerful lords that they had.
But it actually is very interesting. Like none of the religious uprisings that we're treated to in the books are they are, maybe this is too big a topic to get into right now, but they are like written very populist, and they are also written pretty scuzzy. You know,
Mhm.
Right.
so it's kind of interesting.
So,
when
like,
something
the
happens
church.
later, and
Or the crown god.
and
Could
like you know,
also-
like all the small folk whipped into a fury that end up, you know, murdering most of the dragons. Like that's not like a good
Right.
thing, but it's also like,
It kind of is,
But
though, if
they're
you're a member of the
scared.
small folk.
Yeah.
Well, no, because if you're demonizing something or someone as the other and mobilizing people to act against it, it's always a bad idea.
that's true.
Yeah, and another thing, I'll just insert this here and we can go off from there, is we get the very
That's
interesting...
what she said. What?
Oh, God. Well, first off, welcome to Nadia for joining us. She's...
Woo!
Hi.
Nadia.
Hey, Nadia. So this is a character we're actually getting just basically everything from in this book is Reina Targaryen, former
Yeah.
wife of her brother Aegon, and then just a very interesting character from that point onward. And so even though she's spread out through like Aenys, Maegor, and into Jaehaerys, do we want to maybe touch on her and like do a little bit of character analysis with her?
Sure. I mean,
Yeah.
first you said Rhaenys, but it's Visenya. Just to,
Right.
we all knew what you were talking about. But yeah.
I said
No,
I said
Visenya
Reina.
is Black Bride.
I said Reina Targaryen, wife of
Oh.
Aegon,
Dreamfire.
Aegon the
Iron
Uncrowned.
Island or,
Oh, okay. My bad.
or Fair Isle.
Era.
Yeah, and then she got married to the Farman guy.
Right.
That is the
That could be. That's a whole topic.
same thing.
Okay.
That might have been one of the most shocking things.
Yeah.
Like the Targaryens like marrying all the way out there. That wasn't a Lannister.
Well,
Well,
but
there
why?
was a very specific reason for that marriage.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Meaning the sister.
Yeah.
So I do want to ask with that. It seems like, I mean, the way it's written, at least, maybe this is just the Maester making it seem that way, that she genuinely loved Aegon. So I don't know. I think it's interesting, maybe the way trauma informs sexuality and those sorts of things, if that's even a possibility, or I don't know. I don't know if it's meant to be that
Rhaena
way
thing-
or.
I'm not the best person to speak on this, but like it did seem interesting to me that like from the get-go, she always has all these female favorites who she can't bear to be parted from, and like the signs are pretty clear as far as reading between the historical lines, but then it's just like it's almost like gay except for my brother, which is an interesting circumstance.
Right.
It was just that she was brought up her entire life
Yes.
to know that she was going to marry her brother eventually. So she just
Right.
accepted it.
Right.
But
That's
after he
it.
died, she said, that's enough.
Yeah, and I mean maybe the two of them like were kind of like, okay, so we'll have some kids and then we can both go our own ways or whatever.
We don't really see them together closely, do we? Until after Aegon dies.
Seem to have loved him though. Like she's very she's very protective of his memory.
Well, he was her brother.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, but we also see some later Targs who are like, ew,
Yeah,
my brother.
it's definitely. I think it's a mix of her love for him as her brother and also the love for him as the father of her children, who she also loves very dearly.
Fair
So,
point.
if not romantic love, it's very much like family love. Like, I trust this person; they are one of the closest people to me. I can always rely on them. And
It's
so,
devotion.
when he dies, that's something that's ripped from her, and she'll definitely after that relies heavily more on her romantic ties or just friendship ties with some of them, I feel maybe. But
I think there's one thing though we do have to recognize is that when we look at like bisexuality and homosexuality in these times, we have to remember that we're looking at this, and this is something I hear a lot in VOG podcasts. We look at it from a modern point of view, and I think we forget that like we're talking about like almost 1,000 years ago, like 600 years ago. And in those times, this notion of like a gay person or a gay sexuality or, lesbians or any of that stuff isn't something that like your average person and even I would think your maester would really understand. I mean, that's something that is really, even in modern times, I mean, I've been out for 30 years, and when I came out, that wasn't even a notion most people understood 30 years ago, never mind 600 years ago. Like, I mean, I remember Liberace, people didn't understand this concept. He was the most flamboyant queen you could imagine, and so many people, I mean, a lot of people knew, obviously, but a lot of people didn't even understand it or believe it. So this idea that, like, the small folk will understand this, or even learned maesters, is something that we should recognize, like, in these times, and it's hard to say because what does George understand of this, and what's he trying to put in there, but, like, we always talk about, like, do people know that Renly's gay or Loras is gay? No, they wouldn't have back then. In fact, you could argue that Renly and Loras wouldn't even know it because that's not something they would have recognized back then. They might have recognized their love for each other, clearly, but and same thing with all of these characters. Like, she might like women, hang out with them, and spend time with them. Would she even understand what that means for her? Never mind a maester, never mind the small folk. You know what I'm getting at?
It's also a fantasy series.
Certainly, yeah.
So
but it's based on medieval times.
I don't think it's fair to bring down George on, any attitudes he might have towards other sexualities or otherwise, or even comparing them to this world. He wrote them down as they exist.
Right. But my point is we shouldn't think that the commoners are going to have, and even the learned maesters are going to have the kind of understanding that we do. It's 500 years ago. So when we look at this, we should recognize that 500 years ago, they would have looked at this completely differently, and these notions that we have didn't exist then. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. I'm not blaming George for this. My point is just that I guess think people get this.
When you say, like, people wouldn't understand it, like, what do you mean exactly?
The notion of, like, for a lot of people, especially back then, I mean, even 50 years ago, the idea of, like, someone doing it with other men or women or whatever was not, like, an identity thing that we have, like, today. That notion of, like, a gay or a lesbian or even a bisexual or poly or whatever you want to call it, identity is a very, very modern notion.
Well, of course, and it's fluid and it's changed in the past 20 years and the past 5 years,
right.
And
I didn't know
I think what he's saying is, like, the idea that this is who you are, not it's not just something you do.
It's not an activity.
Yeah.
Right. But I mean, I think that's why we don't see Reina, we don't see the maester saying, like, Reina was in love with Alyssa Farman, and right, exactly. Favorites and
even that idea back then would have been really controversial to even vocalize. Like,
I don't know that that's necessarily.
I mean, we don't have any evidence of the gay history of Westeros.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
this book.
This is being written.
Well, there's also Leonard Valerian. We will see him eventually, but he also has, like, these male favorites.
Right.
I mean, I think,
Otto Hightower, I think, even says about Leonard, he's like, we know what he was after he died in a very sort of, we know he didn't sire these children.
Yeah. And what's the maester say?
I don't know what that means.
What do you
I don't
call
like
it?
fish, but when they make it, I'll eat it or whatever. Yeah, when it's served.
Yeah, when you put it in front of them, they'll eat it. Something like that.
And then he says he changes it to turnips for the Aegon.
Yeah, right. But it's still a very modern.
How would a maester know that about fish?
I mean,
anyway,
to your
supposed
point,
to be celibate.
David, I think that what you're saying is absolutely true. I think that the modern, and I mean, this is not something that I've worked extensively on, but I do think that the modern idea of sexuality as fundamental to identity is something that is emerging in a way that it hasn't necessarily in the past. But I would also submit for consideration that in the Middle Ages and in, for example, classical Greece and Rome, even in the Renaissance, like male friendships were, like, homosocial and arguably, like, homoerotic even friendships were prioritized as being the most pure that a relationship between, like, not physically, but the relationship between spirits or between souls, because ironically because of the sort of entrenched misogyny, right? So, like, women weren't capable of, loving to the extent, or kind of meeting on a mind to mind or soul to soul on the level that men were with other men, and
right.
obviously
and especially men that saw battle together, and Tolkien does that with like Sam and Frodo, where everyone thinks they have a thing. It's like, no, but there's like, he's drawing on this relationship that is established between two male characters that is not sexual, but they love each other. I think you're exactly right, where it's like, where you're in a culture of masculinity, some men that appear feminine will be looked at like Lenore, whereas like, in the current book series, what Corbray, where Peter Baelish says like he likes killing and he likes little boys. Like it just prove your manliness first, and then like whatever you get your pleasure from.
Right. Although in the case of Littlefinger, he's a whorehouse runner, so of course he would know that. Would the average person get that, though? That's my point. I don't want to derail the whole conversation. I just want us to recognize that when we talk about sexuality of these characters, that we're looking from a modern point of view, which is of course the only way we can, but recognize that the characters wouldn't.
Right.
Well, I
but
think
in the universe, that we have examples of Lenore that's looked at like effeminate and weak as a quote man, and like these other warriors that may have had male lovers or whatever, but they're looked at as the all alpha male warrior first, and wherever I don't know. I think that's.
Well, I think I think there are a lot of different intersecting threads that are sort of coalescing around what's probably a very touchy topic. But I think that on one hand, this is a culture we've seen very explicitly that values that martial prowess above absolutely anything else. So for somebody to be, cave-chested and round-shouldered and pot-bellied is just as anathema to that warrior excellence. That was one of the sort of sparks for the Blackfire Rebellion, wasn't it? That he
I was about to say,
he was.
I feel like you're talking about Darren the Second here, and I'm getting a little antsy.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? So like, there's that dimension of it where it's like there's this very prescribed sense of proper behavior for everyone, not just for men, but that the prescribed behavior for men is very specific. But then you also have things like, is it Recalio Rendune, right? Like Queen Recalio, who in the sort of the other cultures, it's much more fluid. So we do have that dimension to it. And I think that we can only judge it based on the information that we have in the text. And I think that it is something that's largely unspoken, but I don't have the impression, at least, that it's something that's particularly misunderstood. I think it's just considered to be or regarded as separate from the duty of meeting those prescribed social expectations, right? So you can have as many male lovers as you want, as long as you're still fathering children on your wife, and you can still swing a sword, and you know what I mean? Like that it is regarded much more secondarily, but I don't think necessarily dismissively in the way that that modern regard for it has developed. Does that make sense? Like I don't know.
Right. The main point I just want to bring up is that we need to recognize that when we look at this world, we're looking at it from a modern point of view, which is different. And certainly, as you mentioned there, the same holds true about the idea of female sexuality, like the idea of a woman wanting sex and desiring, whether it be a woman or a man of her choice. It was would have been an alien concept to these people. And it's something that as we've luckily, hopefully progressed as people, we've started to understand ourselves and each other more. But we should recognize that a lot of these notions we have now wouldn't have necessarily held true back then. That's all.
Anything else regarding the reign of either Aenys or Maegor that you guys wanted to bring up?
I don't think Maegor was as bad as he was supposed to be in Ice and Fire. I think that there was a lot of bias. I think that as the events unfolded, I think he's certainly one of the more arrow people that we see.
I guess the question that would really make me just kind of make all the difference is, do you think that the title The Cruel is fitting for him?
No, I don't.
Yes.
Yes.
Hang on, wait.
Yes, we're gonna split on this.
Pre-death or post-death? Because he definitely died for those 21 days, right? Like, he wasn't in some kind of coma. He died.
Oh,
And
boy.
then-
I think,
Well, yeah, but
I
that
think
was
so, yeah.
that was
That's
the beginning of his rule. I mean,
Yeah,
Yeah,
his death
so-
was the beginning of his rule. So, as Maegor the heir, maybe not that bad of a guy. Maegor the king, definitely the cruel from my point of view.
Right. Exactly.
I mean,
For sure.
Sarah, I want to hear your reasoning. I am genuinely
Okay,
fascinated.
First of all,
Right.
I don't condone the actions that were taken by. So I
Right.
don't want to. I don't.
Disclaimer.
But yeah, exactly. But anything, the sort of classic box disclaimer. But I mean, I do think that anything you can point to as qualifying him for that label, I can point pretty readily to somebody else who has done that. And that's, I mean, just because, like,
Designing the Red Keep and then keeping the designs to himself.
I mean,
Yeah, and killing
Yeah,
all.
Yeah, killing all the
everyone
construction
who worked
workers.
on it.
I mean, like Maegor the Thorough, maybe.
You would not be liked by the small folk.
That's awesome.
First of all, generations past will need to know every way of egress from a building in case of fire or emergency.
Right.
He's kept that. He basically
Maegor
kept his
is
entire dynasty.
disrespectful of fire codes. Like, no, but I mean, I understand that the things that he did were very, very much not okay. And I think that if you look at them sort of across his career, then there's a lot that's not okay. But I also think that he's like less paranoid than Cersei. He takes in Ice and Fire.
That's not a high standard.
that's the lowest
I
bar.
would say that's not a high
but
standard.
like, he's I don't think he's nearly as bad all told as some of the people in Dance. And again, I mean, the bar is pretty low there. But what I'm saying is, like, I think that there is an extent to which all of the steps that he takes are at least according to some very sociopathic, sort of fire and blood logic, politically justifiable.
Well, no,
Yeah,
I mean,
well,
he's
okay.
Joffrey, except the faith is going on after, the crowned stag.
I'd argue that he isn't too much like Joffrey. I feel like he actually has strength to back up his cruelty.
I feel like, Joffrey would have if he had been true king, right?
Well, I mean, he
Like,
seems like
yeah.
Joffrey plus Gregor, doesn't he?
Yes. that's
No,
what I was feeling.
I see him as
Some
like
reason.
He's not that brutish as Gregor.
But
Yeah.
he does have
But
the
the
martial
mix.
prowess.
The mix. He's not...
I see him as a Daemon Blackfire. I think that if the
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Blackfire
David Blackfire is the worst, and in this essay, I will explain why.
Oh, God.
No,
We're bringing back
so
the
what I'm saying,
Blackfire
like,
Targaryen controversy.
he's not purposelessly. Is it purposelessly? That sounds really right. But he's not sort of randomly just cruel for the sake of being cruel the way that Joffrey is. Like, he never catapults anybody. He doesn't like beat little girls for fun. You know what I mean? Like, and
We don't necessarily see that
beheads
in the history.
for the guy for talking back to him in the night before he dies. Guy
But
talks
that's-
back to him and he's like, head off on a
Right.
pike in the meeting with us. If that's not
so
a
learn
sadistic-
your lesson, man. Like, I mean,
He ran out of Grand Maesters multiple times. Every time a Grand Maester said, hey,
Right.
this kind of seems like a bad idea, he kills him. Why did the Citadel keep sending them?
I will
Right.
grant you. I will go so far as to grant you Maegor the Excessive, or
But the name is cool.
potentially even Maegor the Unnecessarily Aggro. But I do.
But it's
I-
not
are you
Maegor the
saying-
psycho, it's Maegor the cruel, and I think that's the
Are you-
fundamental question.
But no.
Is he
But
saying he
Just
doesn't
because he has a
necessarily get
reason
pleasure?
for it.
I
Like,
don't
are
think
you
he
saying
does.
he doesn't get
That's what
pleasure
I'm
from
saying.
it? That's why he's
I
not
think
cruel?
He sees it as expedient. I think he sees it
True.
as like a final answer. And I hesitate to use the
Oh.
term final solution because that's a very, that's not an area that I necessarily want to bring in here. But but I don't think that he I don't think that he did anything worse than what Tywin takes pride in having done. How about that?
I think...
But Tywin's a villain, so...
But I feel like you have to come at this from a point of view as comparing him to the other kings. He gets the name the Cruel
Is someone
comparatively.
winching something? What's going on?
Yeah.
They're catapulting the horned men.
Yeah.
So,
Like, because
So on
compare what he does
It's
to
people
some of
above
like
me,
the
sorry.
other kings.
Okay, I mean, okay.
Massacre of small folk. Yeah, I guess you could say Aegon did that at the Field of Fire, but at the same time, that was a war.
That's war. That's
Yeah.
war.
the
He-
closest thing I can come up with is Aegon II, like 120 rat catchers killed
Mhm.
because of
True.
the blood and cheese thing. That's probably the
However,
closest.
debatable that he was ever truly king.
Having read the very, very brief like précis of his reign in the World Book, and then reading it as it actually unfolded on the ground in here, I was fascinated by, I want to say almost like how dismissive they were in Fire and Blood. Where they were like, he was the worst. He extinguished things, and thank God he died before he could do any more damage. But like this one, you're like,
Yeah,
like,
I definitely
I don't
feel like he was earning of the epithet the Cruel, but at the same time, this kind of goes into the world-building historiography, where Yandel was writing for the Lannister/Baratheons, so any chance he's gonna smash the Targaryens, he's gonna do it. But
Yeah, I
you have
actually disagree with that. I think that's it's very. I mean, he has like a freaking love fest over Jaehaerys, you know,
True,
and
but
he's even
everyone does.
Well,
Yeah,
he's,
but-
he's talking about Yandel in World of Ice and Fire. He doesn't even really
well,
go
yeah.
into Jaehaerys.
Yeah,
But
All I want to say is I feel like, okay, so Maegor may have had legitimate reasons for every awful thing he did, but that doesn't make the things he did any less awful.
validity of the reason matters too, not just...
well, but also the world
That's-
context, right? Like people do horrifying things constantly in this world, and all I'm saying is the thing that surprised me when we learned more about Maegor and where he was coming from and how these incidents unfolded and his motivations and the precipitating incidents, that the distance I thought it would take for someone in this world to be unilaterally identified as cruel was significantly less of a distance from things that we have seen unfolding in real time than I expected it to be. That's
He's
all.
not blindly cruel. He has reasons for it, but he's still cruel. That's my point.
Yeah, like when he kills Viserys for no reason because he's mad.
Well, again,
The reason
but,
is
like,
he's mad.
right. But how many times have we seen people killing hostages? Like,
Right,
that's what I'm saying. Like in
but
this
that-
world, what is it that makes him so exceptionally cruel?
because
I mean,
he's the
that's-
king
I can
and
argue
he's
that's
doing
counter-
this.
I
productive,
wonder
though.
if like I wonder
Yes,
if it's
it
the polygamy aspect of the black like that might
Oh,
have
because
like
people care so much about what happens to women. Like,
well no, no I
to
think
women.
it might have been they were sympathetic figures, you know,
Yes, yeah.
and I think that like I don't think anybody was like, oh, these women shouldn't have to marry somebody if they don't want to, but they
Right, right.
but they were like you know, they shouldn't have to be collectively married to
Or
Maegor for the purposes
Maegor
of-
the swipe left. I mean, like,
And polygamy might have something to do with it because
Yeah.
because it's against the faith,
Right.
or
And the
you
thing
know,
is,
it's
that's
against the
all
religious
such a
belief.
hot topic at that point, and he's just
Yeah.
slaughtered so many of the faithful and like ended these orders, and like
Yeah.
it seems like that might be what tipped it over. But I mean, I don't necessarily agree with you, Sarah, but I think that it is interesting that like the monikers that people do get, because like, you know, thinking later down through history, Baelor the Blessed, who I actually have like a weird sympathy for.
I mean, he's yeah.
I mean, you could,
But
you
he's
could almost...
Baelor the
Oh, sorry.
Blessed, right? He's not Baelor the Mad. He's not
Mhm.
Baelor the, you know, and he was clearly insane. You know, he's not even Baelor the Conciliator or anything like that.
mhm.
Fair
It's
enough.
interesting the way that the tags that get put on these people through history, and I kind of wonder if it has to do with like one or two incidents that just kind of strike an identifying note and like flatten the character out.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I
I'm
feel like
sure there are good people on both sides, Sarah.
No. I
There's a question though I
am
have.
approaching this very much from like a devil's advocate position as far as like the context of the world.
You're not
I'm just-
advocating. You're not
So
advocating.
yeah.
I was just surprised that like he was characterized so excessively as like the worst of the worst, but then like
I guess
compared,
it's
I mean, maybe
Could I
people-
offer a reason? Could I
Yeah.
offer
Would you
one
say
reason?
like... Oh, go.
What I
Sorry.
wanted to offer is that maybe one of the reasons is with any history, ultimately history is written by the winners, and we also can look on it with hindsight. And the reality is Maegor was never even a legitimate king. He stole the throne illegitimately. So, and he didn't win in the end. In the end, he lost. So the people who he did awful things to basically got to write the history, right? So he started off badly and ended badly. So whether or not other kings have done some similar things, of course we're going to look on him wrong, because frankly his entire kingship was illegitimate. So then the awful things he did were done for illegitimate reasons. So we kind of look on it negatively when we may not have done that if maybe Jaehaerys had done one of those things or something.
I mean, I think honestly, reading it, a lot of my brain space was basically like, this guy's Henry VIII. Like, yes,
I don't know, totally.
You know what I mean? But like,
or Richard.
I don't really approve of him either. I mean, Richard. All right, you know what?
Let's
never
not
mind.
get into
Richard the second.
British
do the one-to-one.
ancestry.
Richard the Third.
He's a lot of characters, but
I really do want to hear Sarah talk about Richard III, but
We
no.
just like a history podcast with Sarah. We just like toss things at her. Like, what do you think about this?
she can have her whole,
Sarah-
so
her
fun.
own podcast here.
So, Sarah, is your approach just that you think he's more like terrible than cruel? That he's not just doing bad things because they make him feel good, but because they need to be done? Is that a fair way to put it?
I guess maybe like I really do think that he should have been like Maegor the Excessive, or like something like that. Where he just
Maegor
didn't strike me as so far removed from the horrors that we see just in warfare and in these dynastic conflicts as they unfold elsewhere.
Or
that like
it might not have even been Maegor during his reign. Could have just been some spirit that was obtaining his body for several years.
I mean, that's true.
Like,
I think that this guy
Maegor strong
out of nowhere. That like I'm not even sure he had a father. I think Visenya kind of like magicked him into existence, and then he was continued
Hail Satan!
Magic. But
he
I
was
will
a shadow baby, like from the very beginning.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Oh, Maegor
That's
Shadow
cool.
Baby.
We like it.
I really feel truly that the Targaryen house words should just be that escalated quickly.
House Targaryen, not at all what we intended.
Right?
For me, honestly, because like I felt very like there was one point in the narrative where like Aenys is king and they like he gives Maegor the sword, and like it seemed very sad to me that this could potentially have been one of those like great like the hammer and the anvil, or the wise and the sword or something. I'm not thinking of the right terminology, but like a partnership that really worked well. The enforcer and the brains basically, and then
Are you just listing rap groups?
No, I'm actually thinking of the Bible, but that's my default. So
There is so much overlap there, though. I can see where the confusion would come.
Rappers in the Bible. Yeah. I remember listening to the rap version of Proverbs. It's not as interesting as you think.
oh well, wait till you get to Song of Songs.
Oh, now we're talking.
Oh,
It's like Leviticus
spicy.
with a dollar sign and stuff.
Laying down
numbers
some
is just called
knowledge.
stats.
Y'all ready for these rules from God? All right. So
Numbers, we
All
waited.
right, sexuality and religion have gone down. Let's
talk about. All right.
Yes.
Moving
So
on.
Donald Trump.
Oh God.
Oh no!
Moving on
Let's bring it all
from.
out.
Wait, Paul, I want to do one more thing before we go
Okay,
to
one more thing
Jaehaerys.
before we get
Yeah,
to
no, I'll connect this in because and we'll get more into this with Jaehaerys, because kind of one of the most interesting things about this book is seeing kind of various different types of rulers we've had amongst the Targaryens. And what kind of made for, it was basically like a lessons in how to rule of like what worked and what didn't. And so part of this is that kind of both. So I don't think overall it was Maegor, some of the reason like he made kind of such a bad king is kind of both the upbringing of Aenys and Maegor, and where they weren't, of all the things that Aegon did, like the one thing where he failed at was kind of really raising his children to be successful heirs, I suppose. And that it's really unfortunate, just because he seemed to have such a grand scheme of things and overall plan of why he wanted to conquer Westeros, and then it just all got destroyed immediately, just because neither of them were trained properly, and also part of that then is Visenya is the one that kind of survived and helped out with the ruling, and I feel like she had a fairly negative impact on Maegor as well. Whereas it feels like that Visenya herself was very much had some psychopathic and sociopathic tendencies, and that she kind of passed those on to Maegor and how she raised him and how she taught him.
Raised him the way that Cersei raised Joffrey.
Yeah.
Where
sure.
He had some business for the cat.
And the horse.
And so of the main three, it started with the conquest. The most we got out of this, because she lived the longest, was to seeing more of who Visenya was. And it was just interesting to see that it seemed that she wasn't perhaps the nicest of people, but for whatever reason, she had an infinite respect for her brother Aegon, and he was the one person who could keep her in check. Mm-hmm. And once he died, she was left to her own devices and her coldness. And so that... Oh, go ahead, Varley.
No, I was going to say, I think like she represents a lot of people that want power, willing to do some shady shit for it, but not like all the shady shit for it. I feel like Maegor was really willing to kill anyone that went against him, and you saw that with the Grand Maesters. You saw that like in the people that defied him, and especially with the Poor Brothers and the Sworn Swords, or whatever the fuck they're called.
Warrior Sons.
Yeah, Star Swords, whatever.
I love that series.
But I feel like she had like the ambition for power and to maintain it, and was ruthless enough, or as much as anyone else was. Whereas I feel like you see certain kings are pretty lackadaisical about some of them, and some people that really aspire to get power and are willing to do awful stuff, and then some people that find themselves in places of power and do the most awful stuff. So I don't think Joffrey had any machinations to be king, but like when he was king, he was like, whatever, now I can do whatever the fuck I want, and it's all awful stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
I think Visenya might also... This is really me speculating, because we don't get a lot of her internal... We don't get anything inside of any of the heads of the dragon. But I feel like if George was going to write her, like, how if you think about it long enough, you can kind of identify what George has kind of put as each character's like core. So like Tyrion, it's like he's a black hole of love, and like he needs love more than anything else. So I feel like Visenya, it might be her, like, that's probably how she was probably raised. She's not that much older than Aegon. Like, she was raised to think of herself as like, you are his second, you are his number two, like he is everything. Like, to me, a lot of her behavior seems like that, because she's like way too dedicated to him to have been like this crazy, to like be machination all over the place and, plotting against him. Like, she is on his side 1000%, and the realm, the way we understand the realm reflects a lot of that. But so I mean, that's my personal theory of the Visenya case. Yeah. That she and that I think also probably why she didn't like Rhaenys, not really was not that devoted.
Right. Well, she's business where Rhaenys is passion.
Well,
I'm going to get the job done, and I'm going to do what I have to do, my duty and all that. But I'm not going to like show passion to the people in the way that other leaders may.
I definitely feel that it is definitely their clash of ruling style, where Rhaenys is all about soft power, arrange marriages, have singers sing songs of the Targaryens, make the court kind of like this artistic capital and just bring everyone to you and make yourself look good. Whereas Visenya is very much fire and blood, where she is hard power. She is an iron fist, while Rhaenys is more of a silk glove. I definitely
that should
feel
work very well, ideally.
Yeah,
together.
If they had been worked in I feel like when they worked in concert under Aegon, they were super effective. However, with the death of Rhaenys and then Aegon eventually dying himself, you have the last head of the dragon who kind of becomes a bit of a harridan for Aenys, constantly telling him, "Are you gonna do this shit, or do I need to do it, or does my son need to do it?" Because I definitely get the feeling that she was definitely prepping Maegor to take over in the event that the Targaryens just kind of fall apart, that their dynasty starts collapsing. As soon as Aenys is gone, she sees him as an ineffectual ruler, and for the time, I think she doesn't see any signs of Aegon being that different from his father. So I feel like she was preparing Maegor as like the backup plan for once the shit hits the fan, Maegor is going to be the one to take over.
I would even say not the backup plan. I would probably just say
the prime plan.
Plan.
Right, yeah.
I mean, I think we're also, you have to think about where they come from culturally, right? Like, they're not Westerosi, as the doctrine of exceptionalism like emphasizes pretty heavily. But I mean, I think to think about the Valyrian Empire, they weren't diplomats. You know what I mean? Like, they really built the most powerful empire by roasting people and decimating and taking slaves, and I mean that there's an element to which she and he both are cultural throwbacks to an empire that it worked for them until seismic activity, like, or not, but whatever, we'll get into it. But there's no reason to think that if you are a dragon lord from a dragon empire, that like there's a reason not to do it that way. I mean, aside from like human compassion and like whatever. All
right.
Right.
Well, can I ask one thing I'm curious about here is you guys, what is your opinion on the two possible magic elements here? Do you think that she used magic to give birth? And do you think she gave magic to heal? For each of those, what do you think, guys?
I feel it was a natural birth, and I feel it was unnatural healing.
Yes. Agree.
Yeah.
Natural birth, no input on healing.
I want to know why she turned him over to Tyna so readily, because it doesn't seem like, as you guys were saying, like she had so much invested in him for so long, and then she's like, "What? Witch from across the sea? Go for it."
Well, thing is, they mentioned she had been studying, like when she was now kind of a recluse on Dragonstone, she had started kind of looking into like the darker arts. Now, whether or not this is simply the maesters bashing a woman trying to learn more, or she legit was like going through like these ancient, like a lot of their library might have just come from Valyria, and a lot of their tomes might have to do with some of that blood magic the Valyrians were so fond of. So I feel like when Tiana was coming across, she's like, "Oh, cool, magic friend. We can work together to resurrect my son."
Right.
See, I don't think she did it. I think she walked out of the room and was like, "Fix this."
Yeah.
And
I kind of agree.
Do you think they just have a pet cemetery on Dragonstone that they just kind of buried Maegor in and he came back?
Sometimes dead is better.
Definitely.
The only thing I would say to that, Sarah, is that she might have needed to give some of herself to bring back Maegor.
Yeah,
that's true.
Well, that's what I other people have speculated that like he dies so soon after she does because she was like supporting him with her life force.
Right.
But I don't even really have any evidence for my belief that he was conceived magically. I just feel like it's a little weird that it's like, oh, everybody's like, okay, Aenys is the heir, this is cool, and then it's kind of like out of nowhere, all of a sudden he's like, wait, I am pregnant, and it's like,
right.
I don't know. There's a whole thing about like how Aegon was never really that into her romantically, and I just feel like I don't know. I feel like there's something.
No, I mean, literally, it is magic. You don't understand how it happens.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
No,
Well,
I mean,
like two Targaryens
as
love
someone
each other
who's
very
like has a pregnant wife, like I have no idea. Like it just like all of a sudden, like now there's a baby. Like two cells collide and they all of a sudden form this little baby.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
Insane.
Yeah,
it is magic. Like there's no reason for it at all.
And remember, we also know that life has to give for life, like from Mary Mazdor. So whether it's the same magic or similar, that might still hold here. So that could affect this discussion.
Yeah. All right. We've covered things that have been covered in previous books. Now we're gonna delve into shit that we've never even seen before. We're going to start looking at the reign of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, because I feel like I should count her as reigning alongside him, because she plays a very good part in how well the kingdoms turn out. And to start off this discussion, because I know she has a lot of feelings for these two, I want Michal to kind of take the head and lead us into this first discussion.
I just think that this whole thing was really well written, and that they have such service, and it's like every single time something else happened in their lives, it was like, the service, the service. It's like, it's so funny the way like their lives just play out this way, and to me, it's like set off by the fact that George was like, I don't need to write about them. The realm was peaceful. This is fine. Like everything was boring. And then he got into it and it was like, oh, peace actually looks really dirty from a lot of different angles. And I just find, I don't know, I'm not as keen on Jaehaerys as a lot of people are, because I think that he was like a terrible father in a lot of ways. But Alysanne was amazing, and like we have never seen her like since, I think. So that's my intro. Jaehaerys, Alysanne, yay, and also Tsurus.
Yeah.
What I really enjoyed about this is specifically we get some insights as to how the fuck does the kind of Targaryens bring themselves back from all the bullshit Maegor the possibly cruel pulled off.
Right.
Maegor the ambivalent.
Yeah, how do they kind of repair not only their relations with the faith and as well as the nobility? And I was actually kind of disappointed with how they fixed themselves with the faith essentially just getting tired of fighting them and essentially just going, okay, square. I thought there was going to be more of a He's called Jaehaerys the Conciliator, right?
But he kind of doesn't.
Right, but like, when does a faith like ever bend on its on its beliefs? Like, it was just, I don't know. I mean, it was, the conflict between them two was inevitable. And
their whole war was about incest, and then the man who's married to his sister goes, let's stop fighting. They go, okay.
Right.
But also dragons.
Also dragons.
I mean,
the whole point.
That was the thing I always was wondering about this, is that, you've got a king, you've got a line of rulers that are fundamentally opposed to some of the fundamental principles of your entire religion in almost all the country except for the north. So it's like, how does that even work, and how do you make that fit where, this rule applies to everyone but us? Because even in the modern time, we don't talk about the twincest because, that's not okay. But wait, it was okay for them. It's like, how do we have a religion that says this is a wrong, bad thing to do, but we're not going to talk about the kings. Let's just
I mean, I think the perfect answer to that was the one that they talk about the Septon giving, where he's like, well, Sarah, if you go to Dragonstone and claim a dragon, I'll perform the ceremony for you to marry your sister myself.
Right.
There's visible, irrefutable proof that there's something different about these people.
Right.
And I'm using that term very loosely in a lot of respects. But, I think this is one of the very interesting places in which the real world, very realistic, historical socio-political jockeying collides kind of face first with, yeah, but there are dragons.
Right.
And that's something that I think George has this masterful way of kind of lulling us into a false sense of security, or like a kind of, or like, oh yeah, they're all, it's all political, and it's ravens and letters and wars, and you're like, oh, but also magic, and there's this ebb and flow that he does where you get so lost in all of the historical stuff that like there are these moments where you're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
And I think this is one of those moments where, for all of Westeros, where they're like, yeah, but also dragons, right? Like,
I totally agree with that, and I also think that this was an interesting way of George writing himself out of a problem that was a little bit too big to practically solve.
Right.
Because
Yep.
he really did
Right.
like set up like an epic religious conflict, and then also have set up that Jaehaerys somehow conciliated this. So he had to conciliate it without without the realm exploding. But I think I thought the human touches were really, really sharp. Like I think the whole like Alyssa, everything Alyssa does is really relatable, and really, like you just get why she feels the way she feels and why she's doing what she's doing, and that she really wants the best. What's his name? Rogar, whatever, Rogar. Not so much, but whatever.
Yeah.
Rhaego Draz.
Yeah.
No, they're the Baratheon.
Oh,
Yes.
Baratheon, Rogar, gotcha.
Right.
But I also think that it was like a very canny decision on George's part, and a very interesting way of interpreting the way faith works. Because that, like, if you can convince enough people that this particular tenet is true, then everybody just accepts it, And like, I thought that was really smart that they just had this, literally propaganda campaign of like,
Right.
It's just the Targaryens, guys. Like, they're just that awesome. Like, we know the gods hate this. They really, really hate this. But like,
But not
come
this
on,
one
like,
time.
look at these guys, though.
And
Why was
They're cool.
Maegor's one of the Black Queens, like Eleanor, the one who discovered him? Like, why was she so hard behind this campaign? Like, she's one of the ones that we talked about where she went from village to village till her clothes were like tattered, and she just like kept walking and kept proselytizing, and it, like, I was very struck by that, because what about her experience with the Targaryens?
Maybe out of fear that if she doesn't, the church will turn on her and be like, "You're a polygamist. You married a man who was married already."
Well, on the nice perspective, I think she really liked Palestine.
And she did like Jaehaerys, and saw him definitely as maybe like the best alternative to anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Also,
and she had children, right? She had children, right? And
she had
probably
sons.
no money. So this was like her way of ensuring that they would have good futures.
True.
If she, sides with the current king.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably just that.
And also, a big part of kind of mending the rift was the clemency Jaehaerys had for the sons' swords.
Mm-hmm.
The warriors' sons.
Warrior sons and
Warrior
Poor
sons.
Fellows are the two.
Yeah,
Right.
like with Sir Joffrey Doggett, when he comes to court, and he's like, you can't keep serving as a warrior's son. However, I do need some Kingsguard. And
that was such an amazing moment.
I loved that moment, because that was one of the
Same.
moments where I'm like, damn, Jaehaerys.
Yeah.
Right.
That was so awesome.
And
Or when wasn't he the one who just was like, "Let me introduce you to my dragon."
that was that was
Oh no!
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was also
Look
later.
at this balcony. Oh, look.
I think that
Yeah.
was later with Baratheon.
Mm-hmm.
Where he's
Yeah,
like,
but it was still.
do you want
it was like,
do you want my sons as hostages? And he's like, nah, I have dragons.
I don't-
Everyone in the
Yeah,
kingdom
yeah.
is my
Yeah.
hostage.
The whole realm are my hostages.
Yep.
Yeah.
With,
But that is
oh yeah.
that is also an interesting thing where the Kingsguard was still seen as a very high and respectable honor.
Mhm.
So it was one of those things where it really touched like Joffrey Dagger to be offered this place, this such a high position of it's it's what every like knight would achieve for. Even with
speaking of his
the
Kingsguard,
conflict. The one other point I wanted to make is that part of this is with the doctrine of exceptionalism is also just kind of a way of easing in the acceptance amongst the small folk. Whereas I think a big part of it was the fact that just the warrior sons and the poor fellows were so decimated by Maegor, and that they couldn't afford to fight them anymore. So they really needed just a way to explain it to the populace to maintain their support while ending the war.
I think the word you're looking for is flammable. They were very flammable.
Yes,
Right.
Correct. But yes, now we can do Kingsguard, because the how he picks his Kingsguard is fascinating, and they should have kept this practice moving forward.
Yeah. For one, we already mentioned the Hail, Hail Keg of Ale, how everyone kind of had their favorites at the tourney. Those, even the reveal of Jonquil Dark, who I think is one of my favorite little characters we meet along the way. But yeah, we just kind of get all sorts of members join the Kingsguard. I think, how many small folk do we get on the Kingsguard in this one? At least 2, right?
That's a lot, yeah.
I'm about to say, I think, honestly, most of the Kingsguard that were elected to his were not,
of noble
highborn
family, yeah.
Yeah.
We have Doggett as noble family.
And if they were very minor houses.
Oh, they were. I think they're minor Westermen.
Also, you have the guy. I was gonna say, also you have the guy that fights with the spear.
Yeah,
who is
we got
essentially
Joffrey
Trollsongar.
Doggett, Joffrey Doggett and Lawrence Roxton are the only original ones to have noble last names. Because then we have Victor the Valiant, Willem the Wasp, Pate the Woodcock.
I know. I couldn't help but laugh.
You never read that
his name. Yeah.
Sam Good of Sour Hill. Luca More Strong, maybe.
Mm.
Yeah, he must be a strong.
Yeah, he was in the Tourney of the Dragon Pit.
Luca More the Lusty.
Yeah, Luca More the Lusty.
Oh, that's right.
Hey, how long's it been since y'all have heard me?
A while.
A bit.
Took a minute for me to go, who's that?
I was like, everyone's talking over me.
Go ahead. Or do you have nothing to say on this one?
No, not right. No, nothing about the Kingsguard.
Computer does not work.
I had to turn my mic on and off. It's wireless, and I'm good. So I don't know. But yeah, I had a great point about exceptionalism, but I don't want to go back. We've been at it for too long, so
true.
It'll be a mystery.
One thing about this chapter these chapters I find really interesting is that, when the original idea behind releasing this book now was that, damn it, George, can we get wins? No? Okay. Well, can we put something freaking out? His publishers wanted something out before the show ends. So they're like, just throw together what you've got. And that was the original idea, was you can just throw it together, do a little editing, throw a paragraph here and there, it'll all be done. And that was the original idea. But then he realized, well, actually, I wrote almost nothing about Jaehaerys in the World Book. So I guess I'll have to flesh a little bit of it out, including this whole question of, how did he deal with the faith? And it ended up being this little thing he was going to add that ended up being a third of the book, because that's very George, right? That was the whole reason this book happens, was because he was supposed to write a few paragraphs for the World Book, and he ended up writing hundreds of thousands of words. So we now have this whole section of this era that he originally thought was going to be really boring, because peace and prosperity is boring in his own mind. And then he came up with all these brilliant ideas, and most of us think that that's some of the best stuff in this book, was this new stuff he just wrote months ago. So if anything, that's a good sign for the future, because he seems happy and excited and he's writing good stuff. So
hey, I am all for soap opera family drama in the Targaryen family without starting a war, because that's some of the best stuff in here.
So it's so sad.
It is, though.
When they keep having these kids, and it's like, oh wait, you're not next in line. I've never heard of you. Oh crap, I've never heard of you either. And it's finally get to Viserys. And they have this son Viserys, and it's like, oh crap, how are we gonna get down there? Like it's,
That was actually one of my big takeaways from reading this chapter, where I was like, oh, you can have too many kids. Whereas
Right.
like I know it's like a big deal, like, you know, in order to keep the line secure, but he should have stopped at about number 5. Because
Well, but they
Yeah,
weren't
the first
alive
two
all
were
at the same
normal.
time. Yeah, I think the most that were alive at once were like 5 or 6, with some of them being.
Only 5 or 6.
Well, I'm saying out of 13 or whatever, or 11.
right,
it's-
yeah.
Right.
But it just seems like, you know, from kids 6 or 7 onward, like they all had like their own like host of issues that really only negatively impacted, like, you know, either the rule or realm, or I mean, they also showed like kind of the negative aspects of Jaehaerys' character too.
Yeah.
So we got for the children of Jaehaerys, we have
I'm about to say I have my family tree.
Aegon,
yeah,
The complicated.
Daenerys. I'm gonna see how many of them I can do.
yeah,
Aemon, Balon, Alyssa, and I'm done.
yeah. Aegon, Daenerys, Aemon, Balon, Alyssa, Miguela, Vagon, Daela, Sara, Visera, Gaiman, Valerian, and Gale, and only a few of them like survive
Yeah, I was like,
childhood.
Yeah, 4 of those guys. I mean, 4 of them aren't even on the tree because they, you know, died in childbirth or something.
Right.
Yeah, I think Vagon's the only one that even survived both his parents.
Yeah, being a archmaester.
Archmage.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're
it's
right.
weird how we never hear of him again. Like that seemed very interesting to me, that he was just kind of like, he almost seemed like a sociopath who had no interest in hurting anyone actively,
Well,
you know.
He came back to counsel Jaehaerys after Balon died. That's it.
Yeah.
Bear
but,
in
like,
mind,
a
he
minute.
was an archmaester, and his rod and mask were yellow gold, which is math and economics. So it's no surprise
is
that we
that
don't
what- is
hear
that what
from
it is?
him again. Yeah,
But
because he's
it's
busy
like,
going.
They
We better.
even like send him a message like during the council, and he's like,
Just from an academic standpoint, the thing about not being a good maester but being a good archmaester made me laugh really hard, because
Yeah,
like
like-
you can be
He might be able to
like,
write a
academic.
thesis paper. Oh, you want him to
Yeah,
be a real
yeah.
doctor? No, he can never
like-
cure someone.
He's like, oh, you want me to talk to students? No. Can I be the chair of the department? Yes.
It was kind of very touching to see the relationships like their children had with each other, specifically like Aegon and Balon just being brothers. Balon always trying to kind of one up, like, oh well, he just learned how to tame a dragon. I will too. Oh, he just got knighted. Well, I better quickly go do that too.
I like Balon. I'm a younger brother that wants to outdo his older brother and everything, so I liked Balon a lot.
but like the sweet thing is they never seemed like competitive.
Yeah,
it
they
was
never-
more like,
It was never like outright.
It was
It was
friendly.
more friendly
Competitive,
competition.
It was just healthy competition.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean,
And-
this is like an example of how to do it right, where Jaehaerys raised his 2 sons specifically to rule after him in
Right.
combination. And yeah, it probably helped that, you know, there's the office known as the Hand of the King. So he's just like, you know, look, you know, you're going to be one and you're going to be the other.
Right.
So,
He
you
also
know,
had he also had the example of the really bad example before them of the
Yeah.
brothers. You know what happened before that.
right, yeah, but that would also help with the jealousy and all that, where it's just like,
Right.
you know, I may not be able to be king, but I'm at least going to be heavily involved in the ruling of the realm. So, and mostly and equally as important.
Right.
It's kind of one of the main things that you kind of see with Jaehaerys' realm, kind of the big lesson. I mean, because even though he was, you know, he's probably the best you can expect out of the Targaryen kings in terms of how he ruled. But even him, you know, especially with kind of the idea of exceptionalism, there were still some ideas that he was, you know, very, let's say, old school on. And so he definitely had his negative qualities to him. But he was intelligent, and he also was very good at choosing the people around him to help him lead. You know, it came to, you know, starting with who to protect him with his Kingsguard, and then with having Alysanne and Septim Barth, and also Rhaego Dra. How do you pronounce it? Rhaego Draws? Anyone?
Yeah.
Something like that. But yeah, so like that, and then after
Got
he
them.
dies, like he basically essentially puts a woman in charge of being master of coin, So I thought that was kind of one of the most fascinating parts of reading this section is seeing who he picked to help him rule and how that really positively impacted why he was such a successful ruler.
Wow, I was going to say, this kind of apropos of nothing, but did anyone else think of Anakin Skywalker after Balon killed all of those Mirish people? He came back to his mom, was like, I killed them all! Balon hated sand.
Yeah, I think one of the things that also make him like a really popular king, maybe even especially among the small folk, is both his creation of the road systems, his big infrastructure plans of the road systems and the fountains in King's Landing due to Queen Alysanne's goading. The Queen's, the Queen's fountains.
He understood people so well. I mean, that's what, when y'all were talking about exceptionalism, and I couldn't jump in, he played politics so well to get high septons that would help his cause in from the very beginning. And then, when Alysanne talks about the first night, he understands, I have to be careful and cautious about taking rights away from my lords because of rebellions and those kind of things, and just kind of seems to have a really good grasp on people and politics in general, and made progress probably at the right speed for the realm, with some help from Alysanne being a good person.
That's the point I was going to make, is I think it's the two of them together that understood, because like he understood more of what the nobles were looking at, but she understood particularly with her, listening to what the women have to say when they go out on their quest to meet the people. She listened, and she really incorporates a lot of that. A lot of these changes that we give him the credit for are her doing, such as the water. He didn't initially go for it. She had to literally walk into the council meeting with crappy, water that the small folk would have drunk, and said, "Are you going to drink this? Okay, well, if you're not, then let's do something about this." And I think together they made the great pair. And so we have to be careful when we give him credit. A lot of the things that we give him credit for were her doing.
Yeah, and it's interesting how, he gets credit for being a visionary, and he was in a lot of ways. But I think the scene where Alysanne is like, "Hey, the whole first night thing is terrible," and he's like,
"Right,
yeah, I mean,
right,
is it exactly? He doesn't.
Exactly.
He absolutely don't like. He's not doing it for hundreds of years, but then the Targaryens have been doing it too, right?
Right.
Yeah, the Targaryens.
Oh yeah, they mention the dragon seeds.
She was shocked by it.
Yeah.
She was shocked.
That's how the whole thing during the dance comes about, the seeds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also they could just have slept with people.
Right.
It doesn't have to be the first night kind of thing. But I found that very interesting.
Yeah, I get the feeling it's more prevalent in the north than anywhere else.
Yeah, that's
specifically
just because they were
specifically the Boltons.
Well, I think it is now, because they're like Roose Bolton makes it seem like they can't now in the main novels, because Roose Bolton makes it seem like laws can't be really enforced by the crown that far north. But
even in Jaehaerys' time, this happens after Alysanne comes back from the north, right? That's where
yes,
that's where she hears the most complaints about it.
Yeah, because it was still part of their more older culture.
I feel like it was more of an old men thing.
First men stuff.
Oh, sorry, first men.
Probably old men too.
Right, a little both. But it was also only the second time that she'd been out on one of these, so it would have been one of the first things she heard. So that does make sense too.
I'm looking back through some of my notes I put down earlier, and we've actually, timeline-wise, skipped some of the cool things I wanted to mention. Specifically, their marriage itself, how it's very much a secret marriage, one that's, done, with the cunning of both of them. He sends her to Dragonstone, tells his Kingsguard, meet me in Dragonstone, and then they just stay on Dragonstone. It's very much mirroring what comes later with the regency of Aegon the Third, where the king's hand and regent isn't really doing what they want, so it's literally just locking themselves up and saying, "Yeah, we're not coming out till you come of age, or you kind of bend to our will."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the Kingsguard just going, "Come at me, bro."
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
the Kingsguard.
When they challenge them, is that's one
holding
of the
down
better,
Dragonstone.
Yeah,
Which
that's one
I
of the
think is
best
actually
oh shit moments in the book.
Yeah, it's like definitely also like kind of like a fairly formidable fortress, and they have dragon's eggs, so they could get more dragons.
Right, because the terrain is awful. Like you can't mass an army on Dragonstone because it's
got Valyrian
tiny.
construction.
Yeah.
I really, I think Alyssa's reaction to the marriage was very appropriate.
My kids are
in
fucking.
that she didn't. No, she didn't. She didn't object to them marrying each other. She had already seen what had happened when her first two children had married, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, not her.
Yeah, her first two children.
Yeah. First two.
No, it wasn't more Ray. It was with.
Oh yeah.
Aegon and Reina.
Aegon.
Reina and Aegon, right?
Yeah.
I'm confusing the family tree. But yeah, when the first two children married, the realm fell apart because of that, right? And now it's happening again, so she's very worried about what's going to happen to them, which I think is a decent reaction. You know,
No, she's so she's totally logical about it.
Yeah,
it's not like it's not at all a stretch to be like, we just did this and had a war, so maybe let's not do the exact same thing again.
Yeah.
And it was her, and then you have Rogar, who just comes off as just the biggest prick.
Well, yeah, he's just the classic, bro.
Political maneuvering. It's like someone had said, I think, it's Robert Baratheon, but better political maneuvering.
Yeah.
Well,
Except Robert Baratheon made it work.
Yeah, Robert became king.
Exactly.
The
thing is,
he didn't make himself king. Jon Arryn made him king.
Well, yeah.
Rogar, the problem with Rogar is like Alyssa is motivated by keeping her kids safe and keeping the realm at peace.
Yeah.
Or at least out of war. Rogar is kind of just like, but I don't want them to.
Right, yeah.
He's like, I got plans, and they fucked it up.
Him and him to her.
Yeah, he wants things his way, and also a little, misogynistic. Sees the more
and then
passive role for women.
And then we have the attack on Alicent in Jonquil's pool, which I thought was kind of cool, just indicating there are holy sites in Westeros. Like this little pool where Jonquil supposedly bathed is now home to like a mother house, and only women can go in there. And like that's where like this the assassination attempt happens, and she gets the idea of having Jonquil Dark be with her, and so it does a really good job of, again, world building. Like now we know, they have holy sites that pilgrims could go to, and as well as like, there are still remnants of the faith that are still very much not okay with the Targaryens, despite the propaganda.
Yeah, this scene for me kind of highlighted something minor, but it was just kind of like there are some images in this book, like that particular image of that, and the picture of Arya, where like you could skim through the book and be like, it's like almost like Game of Thrones, like that's like salacious and lurid, and then you read the story and it's actually like, oh no, this is like a deep, intense drama, and yes, they happen to be naked, but like there's a reason for that, and
right. Like, and in fact, they did precisely that in the podcast of Ice and Fire, as they were skimming through. Oh, look at this page.
Yeah.
In their podcast on the book, that they did exactly that.
Yeah. Okay, just going through like the timeline. After that, we have Alyssa Farman absconding with the dragon eggs.
Stuff. That's where it gets good.
Oh, Alyssa Farman. Baby. I think she's my favorite, just because I love this idea of her, like her voyage. Do we just want to talk about her voyage right now?
We could talk about her for like a half hour. We could talk about her for the rest of the podcast.
Actually, you know what?
Can we acknowledge just that her name was Farman and she was a lesbian? Like, George, come on. Come on.
Yeah.
She was a lesbian?
I'm sorry, she was one of Reina's favorites. I don't know if you know this, but they really didn't have the same concept of sexual identity.
I almost feel like we could end it there.
Touché.
So I don't know if this is tinfoil about the dragon eggs, because I think it's like the three most likely things, if these are the things, and this is cool. So Dreamfire, like, I think we're led to believe those eggs came from Dreamfire. Mm-hmm. And based on when she was hatched, you would think that her eggs had to be from either Vagar or Meraxes. And I'm assuming Balerion, if that's how dragons lay eggs, if it's not just magical.
And how many dragons were at Dragonstone and laying eggs? Because, like, Dreamfire would, of course, be there because Reina's on Dragonstone.
That's sort of
we don't really know anything about their mating rituals.
Yeah, right. I tend to think they reproduce asexually.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. I mean,
otherwise, wouldn't, like, King's Landing with the dragon pit, like, nobody would sleep. Like,
well, that's what I was thinking. It's just that if Dreamfire is always with Reina and Alyssa's always with Reina, chances are it's going to be higher that she gets the eggs from Dreamfire than the other ones who might be at King's Landing.
So that makes Dany's dragons the grandchildren of Vagar or Meraxes. I don't know. I think that's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, if those are the eggs, which I know, like,
there are 3 eggs. They end up in Essos, and Dany gets them. So they're most likely the same egg.
Yeah.
You have a Bravosi.
Illyrio said that they came from a shy, guys. So
and Illyrio always tells the truth about everything.
And you have the Bravosi kind of like finger to the mouth, like, what eggs? We don't know what you're talking about.
Right. Well, no, we have George. Rough. We have George doing that. That's the thing I love about this most, is that, like, you know, the publishers want to get you to buy this book, right? So they put all the little bits, and I mean, of all the things that link to the other books, this is the big one, right? And it's not like anyone's not going to see, wow, 3 eggs that end up in Bentos and not make the link, right? If you've at least read or you watched the show or anything, right? So they put this in the like official like summary of the book that, ooh, where did Dany's eggs come from? And, you know, a few other things. And then George went, no, that's not true. I never said that. Pay no attention to that. Meanwhile, on his own webpage, you've got the summary from that still there, even though he said it's not true. It's like, is George like actively denying, or is he trying to play the like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, or the unreliable narrator game here? It's kind of funny, the little game he's playing here with this, but like, come on, it's got to be Dany's eggs, right?
I think he said that. I think he didn't confirm it. He says that's not confirmed. Not.
No, he said I never. He said that I didn't say that's not the case. Like,
it's odd to me because I don't get what the point is of, like, you know, it like, does it matter? Like, they're dragons. Like, I don't.
Maybe it's both, and there's just like a Homeward Bound kind of movie where the eggs go all the way to a shy from Bravos and then back.
We'll have the egg movie.
Should we get into Alyssa and all the shit that happens with her and her high tower bros just going on their way? We have now confirmation.
That's the best part of these chapters.
True. So essentially, she kind of goes undercover and takes on the alias of Alice Westhill, which, you know, not too creative. Yeah, you're from the West. Congratulations. And she gets a custom-made boat from Bravos, and which really kick ass. The Sun Chaser, which kind of reminds me a bit of the Dawn Treader from Lion Witch in the Wood a little bit.
I think that was very deliberate.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And she goes to Old Town looking for a crew crazy enough to join her, and wrangles 2 grandsons of the Lord Hightower. But Donald the Delayer, he delays in sending word to Jaehaerys that they have 3, like, a possible thief of dragon eggs in Old Town, and they escape. They come across 3 islands which they name Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya. Okay. They have some cool spices there. Supposedly there is also a large storm that happens beforehand, and supposedly there were krakens in the storm. We don't know for sure, but like, sailors were claiming that a kraken pulled down the autumn moon.
We get a lot of hints of krakens.
Yeah, we get a lot of hints.
Like, so much so that, like, one better appear in the main series, otherwise I'm going to be disappointed.
You have a tentacle fancy, just let me...
And I say that not as a Kraken cast member. Yes,
and the last remaining High Tower kind of goes, well, we should go back. We have this kind of these cool 3 islands with these spices. This is going to be great. And Alyssa's like, nah, it's not far enough. So she keeps going, and he kind of becomes Odysseus trying to find his way back. Gets trapped on I always forget how to pronounce it.
Sothorios.
Well, he changed the spelling between the books. So.
Yeah. Gets trapped there, sees a bunch of cool things, has a Moby Dick moment where a pod of whales assault his ship, and thankfully gets saved by some summer islanders who take him back to Tall Trees Town, fix up his ship, and send him on his way. And he just kind of comes back I don't know what the fuck happened to her. And then we get Corlys Velaryon years later going, nah, I swear to God, I saw the Sun Chaser in a shy.
Right. Well, never mind the fact also that Sothorios is on the other side of Westeros from where they were.
Yeah.
Unless they went all the way around the world, which was what they were trying to do.
Yeah, but that's what she was trying to do, right? Sail around the world.
But one thing you did miss, though, the fact that Alyssa's boat, apparently went very close to Reina when she was on dragons. They almost passed in the night, but not quite. And that's kind of a neat little moment. I like, even though they really didn't, but they were in the vicinity, which is close enough. But it makes for dramatic,
And then we have the story of Arya Targaryen, which is Alien, Alien the movie.
Before that, though, also, I mean, what ended up happening with her husband, with Andro and the betrayal of Queen Reina. I mean, that I thought was one of the most interesting stories in the whole book.
I definitely, it was definitely kind of like one of those horror stories, specifically with the fact that everyone's going, oh my God, it's a disease, but it's only killing women.
Right.
And
exactly.
It's coming from inside the house.
Yes.
Right. And it turns out to be poison. It's just poison.
Yeah, no, that was one of those things reading the story, it was very obvious that this guy was on the point of snapping and no one could see it.
And no one knew,
No one cared, really.
Right, yeah, I guess,
Which is the point.
Looked above him.
That's why he did this, because no one cared. They treated him like shit, and he was like, I'll show you.
So then we have Arya mounting Balerion and just riding off.
Oh, wait, you forgot the part where she feeds him to her dragon.
Yes. Well, she first threatens to cut off his junk and feed it to him, and then he jumps out the window, and she has him fed to the dragon.
Yeah, which...
He's already dead, though. It's just his corpse that's getting munched on.
But still.
Yeah. All right, so now Arya Targaryen.
Right.
And I don't know why, but just I was at first kind of excited because I'm like, it's so cool that the writer of Balerion the Black Dread after Maegor is this little girl who just kind of gets on him. But then it kind of turns out she wasn't so much a writer as she was a passenger.
Or so we think.
Because for all we know, she could have headed towards King's Landing at first, but supposedly he takes her to Valyria. What do you guys think?
Oh, did we? I don't think we talked about the switch where the twins were switched with each other.
God,
there's so much to talk. There's so much to talk about in these chapters.
Yeah, it's just funny that someone realized, oh, these kids went to the wrong place. Let's just switch them.
Right.
Someone was a big fan of The Parent Trap and was just like, we got this.
Yeah, but I also like how it's just one of those things where everyone, it's kind of a known secret, oh yeah, those two were switched, but it's probably for the better. And are you going to tell the Targaryens no? Well, then let it go.
They got dragons.
Yeah. But seriously, Arya's life is so sad all the way through. First her father dies, then her mother has to send her away, and then even when they reunited, their relationship is
cold.
It's cold. Yeah, exactly. Reina takes her daughter back, but she doesn't really show her any affection, to the point that Arya becomes desperate. Like she
Alyssa wants. She
Alyssa,
begs Alyssa to take her. She begs everyone to take her away.
Yeah.
Yeah, she asked Alyson to take her back to King's Landing because that was where she got some attention from,
And Alyson
from
wanted
anyone.
to.
Yeah.
Right.
Which
led to trouble. Which led to more jealousy.
Yeah. Well, it's all very like hurt people kind of stuff, right? Like
right.
Reina had Aegon die.
It's all
she had this.
She had to marry Maegor,
who was so excessive.
You can say cruel. Sarah's not here anymore.
Cruel.
I know. So I mean, I think that's sort of after all that. There's a kind of a different. Reina goes from maybe being assertive when she first starts writing Dreamfire to then just sort of being brooding and with good reason. She probably never really healed from all of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will say it's one of my just a small complaint of the book where there seemed to be a decent amount of female characters that were just kind of left where they underwent just a serious and significant trauma, and then they were just kind of left with all the negative aspects that kind of men in the patriarchal world like associate with like women's weakness. And I was just a little disappointed in that there just seemed to be too many of these female characters that just became a little bit negatively stereotypical.
What was the I forgot her name, the Queen Eleanor that went out for the faith? I mean, she seemed like she found some semblance of peace and healing. But I mean, in general, I'd say 9 out of 10 characters in any of George's, in this universe that have trauma don't recover. I mean, it's not really.
And there's like no women without trauma. Every woman in the books, has had to deal with it because it's a shitty world to be a woman in.
Yeah,
it's a shitty world to be a woman in. You know what I mean?
But even like later on, we get to Aegon the Third and Viserys, and it's like they're completely different personalities just because of where they were during the dance. Like not really any other reason.
Yeah, for sure. But like with them, they also don't tend to make these, what you would call like crazy emotional decisions that kind of negatively impact the world around them as much as the women did with this, especially with the whole greens and the blacks and dance and all that. So yeah, it was just one of those things where I don't know, it nagged at me.
Don't blame the dance on women. Come on now. That's Otto.
Right.
Otto, man.
Right, no, it's Otto and Kristen Cole or whatever. But
I actually think that what's her face has a lot to do with it.
Alicent too. But it was just that. But like it was once Rhaenyra finally got into power. Like she didn't make one. I mean, she was like Cersei. She didn't make one good decision. Like once she got into power, and it was disappointing.
Yeah.
All right. So Arya.
Let's do Arya here because this is fun.
That's another big one.
Yeah. Essentially rides off on Balerion. We don't know for sure where she goes, but she eventually, just the writing of like how it's like everyone remembers where they were when Balerion returned to King's Landing. And just like the shiver down my back of like a guardsman on a tower, just seeing like this little black speck growing and growing, and then just going, oh shit, and starts ringing a bell. Like, it's scary kind of, because it's very much a horror story, because she comes back she has a fever that nothing can quench, and there are things wriggling inside her. And I think the thing that also like scared me the most is that there's a massive wound on Balerion. Something managed to wound the oldest dragon in the known world. Right. And I'm of the opinion that I think that's kind of like one of the things that leads to Balerion's death. It's slow, and sure, it might have just been old age, but we don't know for sure like how old dragons can grow to be, because we only have the evidence of Balerion.
Right.
So
he stopped
growing
after that. Yeah,
after that.
So he lived like 40 more years. That's like 55 AC or around there, and then Viserys rides him and he dies in like 94. What's kind of crazy with this story to me is it kind of just felt like George had to figure out some way to explain King Viserys riding Balerion, because I remember reading that in the World of Ice and Fire book and being like, huh? Like the Viserys the first is the most like docile, amiable king that, is probably no better than Aenys. He just, followed Jaehaerys, so he inherited a super stable realm.
Isn't he only counted as a rider of Balerion because he rode around the city once before Balerion got tired and winded and had to take a rest?
So that's not even in World of Ice and Fire. So like George just says, the only line is, after Balerion died, Viserys didn't ride another dragon. Wasn't interested. So it's like he had to figure. I think after all this, he was like, all right, I have to figure out how I get this like kind of lazy, doesn't do much king onto the greatest dragon that,
and just turned the dragon into a lazy do nothing dragon by the end of it.
Yeah. Well, just sick.
But yeah, so. What do you guys think? Because very much, it was also like almost kind of like Frankenstein's revelation when Septon Barth is writing about it, because he's just like, "Dear God, I remember it so vividly."
Right, which no one else got to know. Like no one in the realm would know this. We only know this from like
only because Gildane went through the papers and went, "Oh my God."
Right. You know the one thing I really want to know is she did whisper things that he said were so horrific he'll never forget them, but he doesn't tell us what they are. It's like, I want to know what she was saying.
Yeah.
What was she saying?
Thanks, George. You needs to hold back stuff for future books.
Right.
Although we got more than I expected. I really thought it was going to cut out after it
was
like, and I could never say anything about this, and I thought it was going to like end there.
But yeah, just that entire the worm things that were in her body incubating.
One of them
apparently.
as long as his arm. One of them as long as an arm.
George writes really good horror. Like,
his sci-fi stuff is disturbing.
Yeah.
Do y'all think that Barth's estimations that she couldn't control the dragon and that they went to Valyria, that we're supposed to take those as true since George ascribes them to Barth?
I do.
I feel like
I think
safe
we're supposed to
say.
take them as true because otherwise the story's not interesting.
Right. If it's
it's either that or she went to like a shy or something, but it doesn't like.
Or Sithorius.
But there are people who live in Ashai. Like, it's not. People in Westeros don't know what Ashai is like, but they just know it's magical and whatnot. But there are normal people living in there.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, quote unquote normal people.
No kids.
No kids live in a shy.
No kids.
Do we know? I mean,
could have been a Sithorius too. It could be Sithorius because we know there's creatures in Sithorius that like lay eggs skin. So that it could have been there.
Well, I think
but I think Septon Bart's assumptions do make sense. That Balerion she was 11, and she couldn't control a dragon, right?
Right.
So
Balerion is like
Balerion
the oldest
just
dragon.
went home.
I was also thinking
and she was burning. Like that's kind of the key part too.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's got to be Valyria because that makes the most narrative sense and is the most interesting thing for us to think about. But it's not necessarily true.
Right. Yeah.
Just
like with the dragons, the dragon eggs have got to be Dany's dragons. I mean, we wouldn't care if they weren't, but we can't say for sure.
We get her eventually just dying, and they have to kind of like cover up her body and just quickly burn it as soon as possible. And Jaehaerys just never talks about it ever again.
Right.
Yeah.
It is very interesting how quickly they put this story away. Like Reina doesn't get to see her. Like they don't bring it up again, and it's
at the same time.
Interesting.
I wonder how much harm it would have done for Reina to see the state her daughter was in.
Oh, I don't think that would be.
Oh,
she'd have gone to Valyria.
She would have.
She would have. Yeah.
She would have ended up on those spikes with the other members of her family that eventually ended up on those spikes.
Well, how about imagine if she hadn't been in the water? I mean, the one thing that he says is that the worms didn't survive because of the cold and the ice.
Yeah,
and
they
the
didn't
water
like the ice.
Imagine if they weren't, if she wasn't in there and they had just left her on like the slab or whatever, and like these things ended up all over like King's Landing.
Yeah, no, it could have spread.
Could have been like a whole horror movie. That would be the end of King's Landing, maybe, you know.
Well, so I know Aziz. I was like, from History of Westeros, I was like messaging him, like, what the hell happened?
Right.
And his theory is that Arya did what Dany does in at the end of Dance with Dragons, which is her dragon kills something and she eats the leftovers, and that there is some kind of parasite living in, like, she wasn't wounded herself, and I don't think we have any indication that she had any wounds on her body, but that she absorbed a parasite somehow, and that's probably like separate and apart from the thing that wounded Valerian.
Oh.
Yeah, and I mean, it could have gotten into her just anyway without her eating stuff up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like that's kind of what solidified is. It just kind of solidified the description of Valyria just kind of being, this nuclear wasteland,
right?
Type thing with, except instead of radiation, well, I mean, there's probably a little radiation there too, but
because I kind of when they like a massive wound was on Valerian. And I just imagined, like, Balerion now taking on, like, this mutated dragon which somehow survived the doom and just clawing at each other while Arya's just screaming. God. Yeah.
Right, yeah. I mean, the true tinfoil thing would be, like, if there was any semblance of, like, intelligent creature left in Valyria that had some sort of control over whatever mutations were left there.
Mm-hmm. And remember, the worms had faces too. That's like the creepiest part of it. That's just like.
Do they have human faces?
It didn't say that. It just said faces. But I mean, worms don't generally have what you'd consider a face. I mean, even if they kind of do, you know.
Oh yeah, I see. What
so
you're
I'm assuming they mean humanoid. I think they mean like humanoid. Yeah, and some of them had hands too.
Yeah, and so it's like this is kind of one of the major passages that really. I don't know, and overall, this book in general really just knocked home the fact that just how deep the Valyrians were into like genetic experiments and like gene splicing and whatever else they did. It was just like one of those things that really hammered that home. Yeah, the one thing I want to mention is that with the description of her skin burning and stuff.
Yeah,
the
coming out of her.
Yeah, the immediate thought that popped into my head was through those genetic experiments, did the Valyrians manage to create something that was like an other, but just a fire version? And then that also led to, is that, are those experiments, is what happened to Victarion from Makoro kind of a minor version of those experiments? And then further on from that, like, will someone, say, Jon, undergo like one of those transformations in order to help defeat the others at the end, and so we truly get like a full like being of ice versus being of fire, like fighting one another at the end. That's where my tinfoil leapt to.
We then have the trip to Winterfell, of course, where Alysanne is just so fucking charming. You have kind of like the fun little tournament in White Harbor where Jonquil Dark fights a wildling girl who was being raised at White Harbor, which I kind of want to just know about her now more too. You have her going to Winterfell, and then the Wall, and then back. You have the creepy thing where her dragon won't go past the Wall, always turns back. I guess we can go... Oh, yeah.
While we're talking about the Wall, and it's I forget if it was just before this or just after this, but one of the things I do like in this book is all the little Easter eggs that George drops that sometimes explain some things in the current books. Like one little mention I loved, which is when he's talking about when they talk about how Jaehaerys was looking for people for his council later, or a replacement. One of the people they talk about is one of the Arryns, and then they have a little mention of, well, unfortunately, the older Arryn had died because he was attacked by some wildling raiders that they had pursued into the mountains of the moon. It's like, it's just a little like one-line thing, because now the Arryn is a kid, but it's like, well, clearly we're getting the ancestors of Tyrion's little band of of people who join him in the war. You know, we get that little, it's just like one line thing, but it like, oh, well, this is going to be really big and later.
Right, yeah. The origin of the Burn Men was a fun little touch that was added to this book.
I did like that. So I guess we can skip ahead to Sara, very much the trouble child for Alysanne and Jaehaerys, and actually results in the first quarrel between the two. I'll just kind of read off the description. Jaehaerys learned that his daughter had bedded 3 young knights. He confronted her and had her confined to her bedchambers after she suggested she could wed all 3 of them, comparing herself to King Maegor the Cruel and his many wives. Furious and ashamed, Jaehaerys is said to have stated that more than once that she is no longer my daughter. Alysanne attempted to change his mind, but after Sara attempted to flee to the dragon pit to steal a dragon, Jaehaerys confined her to her tower cell, dealt with the 3 knights in question, personally killing one in a trial by combat. As punishment for Sara, she was sent to Old Town to serve the Faith of the Seven as a novice. Later, she escaped to Lys, where she became a whore in a pleasure garden. When Alysanne proclaimed that the Lyseni had turned their daughter into a whore, Jaehaerys replied she always was one. However, those closest to Jaehaerys claimed that he was never the same after Sara's disgrace, and later abandoned him, although he would forever after refuse Alysanne to bring Sara home, a discussion that led to the first quarrel. Their rift would last 2 years, during which time Jaehaerys was mostly on a royal progress. And yeah, it just is just sad, because like even at the end, when Jaehaerys is dying and Alicent Hightowers with him, he mistakenly keeps calling her Sara, thinking that she had returned. And it's just...
Yeah. And she's also one of the kids that survives them both, right?
Yes,
right, yeah.
she and
Vagon and
Vagon.
And did Maegel...
No, she died.
No,
Balon.
Maegel died.
No, Balon didn't survive.
Not
I'm sorry,
Balon.
Not Balon.
That's my boy.
Not your boy.
Because like Miguel died, or was it Miguel or Visera who died on the horse ride?
That was Visera.
That was
Miguel
Visera.
died of grayscale.
Yeah, Miguel
saying-
had grayscale because she was tending to the sick.
Because Targaryens are immune to grayscale.
No, not
after,
all of them.
After
only the dragon riders,
and
probably
after,
something like that.
Daenerys, their other daughter, died of the shivers. Also, we skipped the shivers, but that was also kind of chilling how he kind of said every time it would begin with someone saying, "I'm feeling a bit cold, close the window." And every time they say that, you're like, well, they're dead.
Yeah. Yep. And then the shadow baby comes in.
Yeah.
Speaking of horror writing, though, I don't think George gets quite enough credit for writing diseases.
Oh, yeah. It's disturbing shit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I love in the audiobook, The Shivers, Simon Vance is like, he sort of like slips into Jaehaerys' mindset when he's describing it. He goes, and Targaryens don't get sick. Like super, like defensive about it. It's good.
Aemon dies. Balon kills them. That leads to the second quarrel, however, because then there is the discussion over whether Aemon's only child, Princess Rhaenys, who apparently has the Baratheon looks, showing that the seed is indeed strong. There's the question of whether Princess Rhaenys will inherit, or whether Prince Balon should inherit. And Jaehaerys says, well, Aemon was never king, so Aegon was never... Yeah, is it Prince Aemon or Prince Aegon? Because I feel like it changes several times.
No, it's Aemon's his firstborn son.
Okay.
Well, Aegon is his firstborn, but he dies.
Right, yeah, the one that's alive.
Shit, now I'm... All right. So Aemon was never king, so he goes, well, Balon will be king then. And that leads to the second quarrel, because Alicent's like, nah, that's bullshit. And...
Well, it's interesting, because this argument gets headed off by the fact that Daenerys dies.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's very much like, she's going to be queen, and I guess she'll like her brother, but she's queen. And then. Yeah,
and then she goes off for Dragonstone for 2 years and then comes back.
All right, so
And
on
then
that quarrel,
everyone just starts dying around him after that.
Right, and that's the problem where like he lived too long, and so
long.
like and so like the people who were meant to rule after him died before he did, and so then it got all fucked up.
Yeah. Well, and like I don't know. I think Viserys probably would have been a better king if he'd inherited it 35 or 40 instead of 25 or whatever.
I guess. I put thought into this as to like who I would want just based on ability, and I do think after Aemon died, it should have gone to Balon just because like he'd been brought up to rule, and so he was prepared for it.
Yeah.
But after that, I think actually Rhaenys would probably have made the best ruler. Yeah. Like just in terms of people who had like experience with it.
Do we know much about her? Someone brought that up in another group online I was in, and I was like, do we know much about her besides that she went out and fought in the Dance of the Dragons and was kind of the front line there and died? And I don't remember her saying much or doing much.
We do hear some of it in this book when she gets married to Corlys Velaryon, and they do say that she was pretty competent, that she was very charming, that she had all the makings of a good ruler, and she was married to a very a strong
noble husband.
Noble husband who wasn't just out for his own interests, right?
And the Valyrians had always been closely tied to the Targaryens.
Exactly.
Yeah, they were always part of the ruling council anyway.
Yeah, I feel like for like almost like the first half of all the Targaryen kings, you have a Valyrian as master of ships, a Celtigar as master of coin at some point, and then, like, depending on how well they fuck up, replace them with someone more competent. It's just kind of cool to see evidence of having the Targaryen preference for their original vassals last for a good while into their rules as kings.
And even like Aegon III having the deep love for Alan Oakenfist and Corlys Velaryon. Even though he probably didn't know him that well before the dance or during the dance or anything, he, during his regency, he was always kind of pushing for those guys.
Yeah. And then people just start dying around him. First is Septon Barth, who just dies in his sleep. He gets replaced by Sir Ryam Redwyn of the Kingsguard, who just turns out to be the shittiest king.
Yeah, what a dumb choice! Like that was such an odd pick, where usually he makes smart decisions and he just failed on that one.
I think he was just kind of at a loss at that time because like Barth had been his right hand, and he's like, well, shit, someone's got to do it.
Yeah. So what? And then he gives it to Balon, right?
Yeah,
he gives it to Balon after that.
Which, like, Balon was, like, 40 or whatever when, he was old enough to be hand when when Barth died. Why would you not go straight to him?
Right, he was the clear choice for it.
After that, Princess Gale dies. They say she died from summer fever, but she instead committed suicide by drowning herself in the Blackwater Rush. After that, Alysanne can't stand to be in King's Landing anymore, and she goes to live at Dragonstone and then dies less than a year later. After that, his son Balon suddenly dies, and then Jaehaerys essentially hands the realm over to Sir Otto Hightower as he's getting older. Finally, after the death of Balon, he calls Vaegon to discuss the laws of succession, possibly asking to see if he'd become king. Regardless, he doesn't. Instead, he decides to hold a great council in which Prince Viserys is elected, despite Rhaenys having a rather impressive array of lords. Like, even though they say it's like 20-1 against her. Like, she has like the Starks, she has the Arryns essentially, she has the Valyrians, of course. So.
Yeah, I will say it was a smart decision to call like the Great Council to choose the next ruler because to head off an inevitable war. It just sucks that Viserys was a shitty ruler who just didn't put his foot down.
Yeah. Well,
when did Alysanne make this speech in the council where she says, if all you need to be a good ruler is a cock, then you have no need of me? and she walks out. She goes to Dragonstone.
Yeah, that was one of the earlier ones. The
Yeah,
second
but that
quarrel.
was so awesome.
That was
Yeah.
Balon. When she named Balon,
Yeah.
he named Balon.
She has a lot of mic drop moments where whenever they've done the quarrels, I feel like she's had the last word and then just leaves, and Jaehaerys is just like, "What? Oh."
Well, and I mean,
God
like,
damn it, she's right every time.
the dichotomy is supposed to be, I think, like, Alysanne represents modern sensibilities, right? Like, everyone deserves clean water, you know? And
Clean water is a privilege, not a right.
but like Jaehaerys, I think he believes some of that, but he has, he's balancing it with what he can do, and when it comes to the inheritance, I don't know.
I think they stand for like bold idealism tempered with realism of how to best go about things.
Right.
But the thing also I think is like, I think a lot of this speaks to Jaehaerys, to some flaws in Jaehaerys' personality. Personally,
he's very stubborn.
Like, he's very stubborn, and he's also like, he's a good guy. Like, obviously, he's a good guy.
Yeah.
But he's not an empathetic person, and so to him, when like Alysanne, I feel like a lot of their child raising years are kind of like Alysanne going like, all right, so here's what this particular child needs. And he's like, why don't I just do something else, though? Like, what's her face? She has to get married. She keeps crying all the time. Oh, my God, I have to get her out of here. She has to get married. Like, and it's like, oh, no, maybe not, though. Maybe that'll be a disaster.
Yeah, and that's what I was saying, kind of the negative aspects of exceptionalism, where, like, he truly thinks the Targaryens are just better than other people, and that he shouldn't be challenged as much in his rulings, and he does have the old school, more patriarchal ideals as well.
Yeah,
but I mean, like
just one little thing that was kind of sad was when they needed a new master of coin, and Septon Bart suggested that they get this. Who was the guy? Was he a Tyrell?
A Tyrell, yeah.
A Tyrell, yeah. But he was very clear that it's not him that we want, it's his wife, because she's very clever. But everyone acknowledges it, but they can't have her on the council because she's a woman.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was sad, because even though, they've had Alysanne serving on the council for so many years, and she's done a great job, but they can't have a second woman there.
Well, I think it's also because she doesn't have an official title. She's the queen, and she's there on Jaehaerys' behest, but she doesn't actually have a right to be in the council. It's just because Jaehaerys is like, no, I want her input.
Yeah, and it's not for their benefit. It's for the lords of Westeros. It's to keep them,
keep them from being insulted.
That moment where Alysanne is like to the maesters, like, hey, women would actually make awesome maesters.
Oh yeah.
There's that.
And like, you just think of like how many women's lives would have been different if they had the option of going to the Citadel.
Just a lot of rees from the Citadel upon hearing that.
Yeah, it is so dumb that's not allowed.
Because how much more reliable these histories would be. Jeez.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. At the same time, it's also kind of unlike the real world, where like a lot of like hobbies of the noble women was history. Like there's like a Byzantine princess who wrote an entire history of her family.
Oh yeah, Anna something.
Yeah,
Anna.
and she like I forget whatever the Byzantine last name was at the time, but she did like a big thing, and like the history was constantly used as like an analysis of royal families, and I'm like, they kind of miss out with that, specifically because all the like references Gildane uses are like male stories, except for like the one body one, which he's like, it was written by a woman. Because I'm like, I feel like a lot of noble girls might have been very interested in just writing down their family histories, and there's not really anything in the law of like chivalry or like ladyship that says you can't write.
Do you think maybe like when he says uncited sources, like sources indicate this or that maybe that's...
I definitely think maybe
women's writings, but that I think that goes back to the whole discussion of if George is intentional about every little Easter egg and connection we make, you know.
Yeah, I guess
well,
it's
like
always...
then later,
or if we
who writes
shoehorn it
the
in.
Women of the Aftermath book? Like, was that a guy? I don't think we have a source for who
don't.
it is.
Yeah. All right.
Doesn't seem like the type of thing that a dude would be super interested in, given.
Yeah.
we know Westeros.
Bringing that, like, this part back to inheritance discussion, though. I mean, I don't know. In some level, I think it's kind of... If Jaehaerys picks Rhaenys, he, in a lot of ways, delegitimizes himself. And not that he is at risk of losing his throne or anything at that point, but there is something to be said of if females can inherit before male claimants at this point, then there's two that had a better claim to his throne when he took it. He makes himself a usurper if...
Well, only
in a
with
way.
Appointing...
Well, it was only Reina, right? Reina was older than him? That's what you're
Reina
saying?
was older than him, but I feel like...
Right, and Arya, too. I mean,
I feel
they would both have better claims than him if women could inherit.
Well, Reina and Arya would, but specifically talking about...
Well, Arya only would if Reina did.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like contingent on.
Yeah, it only depends on Reina, and their position is much different than the two positions they found earlier, where both, like, the female claimant and the male claimant were both children of sons of the king, not daughters of the king. So there's no, like, a daughter inherits before a son. It's more like
But then
the daughter
Aegon's
of an
daughter,
heir
right?
inherits before her uncle, which I think would be more digestible.
Well, then Arya should have inherited, right? Because she was Aegon's daughter, who was older than Jaehaerys.
Yeah, but Aegon was never
Right.
king, technically. I don't know.
Well, but he was the oldest son.
He was the oldest son, but
I know.
a lot of it's like,
Right.
It gets
if
complicated.
it's king, if they're king or not, I don't know.
Yeah,
But
it
I
gets
was
so
thinking-
weird, and I don't like that rule either. I think
Yeah.
it should pass down the line, of the
Rhaenys.
first line of brother to brother before it goes to the son of the first son. I feel like
no, that gets...
I don't.
Yeah.
agree, but
There's a reason they do it that way. I mean,
Yeah.
just
Well-
for simplicity's sake, it gets pretty messy if you...
right, yeah.
Yeah.
I see that, but it could also lead to more, child rulers too.
True.
Or, crazy thought,
Or you can...
democracy.
You can just, like, you can be like the Ottomans or the Mughals, and when you become a king, you just kill all of your brothers and all of your nephews, and then there are no other claimants.
Right, yeah.
Well, it's
Crisp
also
and
like
clean.
the
Or
dumb thing
send
about
them
a
to
lot
be-
of this. The dumb thing is that, like, it needs to be a precedent, But,
Yeah.
like, we can't
Yeah.
be picking the right person for this particular, the right person now. Like, we have to be picking the entire legal, like, the whole legal system of the country for everybody. Not, Rhaenyra deals with this later on, where she doesn't give, like, some daughters their inheritance, and it's just like, guys, maybe, like, take this one step at a time.
Mhm.
Mm. But yeah, it also something that ideally should have been decided during the middle of a reign rather than towards the end of one.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, it was. His heirs died
True.
late in his reign.
Right, yeah, but it was still, he was prepping for,
Too
the
many
soon to be
heirs.
day that he would die. But yeah, it's one of those things that they really should have tried to settle at some point and just declare, like, okay, this is what it's going to be from now on,
All right.
officially.
We've
Yeah.
been
I mean,
going for 3 hours, so I'm thinking, do we just want to split this baby into two and just
Oh,
yeah.
record at another time? Because holy shit, I'm not
Yeah.
going to be able to stop myself when we get to the regency of Aegon III. Don't even try to stop me. All right.
Yeah.
We could just have a 9-hour podcast. That's
Oh
all.
God.
Let's see if we can beat 500. No,
No, because I need to edit this, so I'm not hurting myself with that.
Yeah.
Plus,
All right.
this will give Sara a chance to come back and bring her tinfoil with us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was also
Or, yeah,
thinking about those who had to leave early.
I think those. I mean, we could do tinfoil and
That's true.
the second half of this book. There's fun. This is basically almost
yeah.
the length of Game of
You're probably
Thrones.
nuts for
Like,
that, yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, this is the only content we have that we haven't all read a million times.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So it gives us a chance to read it another million times.
Right.
And similar to the end of this book, surprise, we're just going to stop.